It began with fog thick enough to erase the world. The fields around Arracourt were wide, rolling, and deceptively calm, but on those late September mornings of 1944, the fog didn't simply cover the ground, it swallowed it. Whole villages vanished behind the grey veil. Trees dissolved into shapeless shadows, roads seemed to drift out of existence. Even sound felt muffled, softened, turned into something distant. It was the kind of fog that made the horizon feel infinite and claustrophobic at the same time. And through that haze came the rumble of engines. American tank crews of the 4th Armoured Division strained to see just a few feet ahead. Dew clung to the metal of their Shermans. Radios crackled with fragmented reports. The air smelled of wet earth and exhaust. Boots slipped in damp grass as crews loaded ammunition, checked elevation, adjusted sights blurred by moisture. They were veterans of Normandy, hardened by hedgerow fighting, but Arracourt presented something new, a battlefield made blind by weather, unpredictable in every direction. Somewhere beyond the fog, German armour was advancing fast, determined, and in far greater numbers than American command initially realised. The newly formed Panzer brigades, fresh with tanks and ambition, moved east to west with a confidence built on the belief that thick fog would neutralise the American advantage in air power and long-range visibility. The Germans expected surprise, expected momentum, expected breakthrough. What they did not expect was that the fog would become a weapon whose loyalty changed by the minute. Inside the grey void, nothing looked familiar. Farmhouses seemed to shift places. Tree lines appeared where none had been the day before. A ridge might appear enormous from one angle and disappear entirely from another. Tanks moved cautiously, like enormous animals sniffing their way through a forest of ghosts. The Americans listened, really listened, because vision was useless. A distant grind of gears might be friend or foe. A cough of diesel smoke might be a stalled Sherman or a concealed Panther. The clatter of tracks could signal opportunity or disaster. And when the first German armour finally emerged from the fog, it did not appear slowly. It materialised sudden, colossal, close. Sherman crews reacted instantly, more from instinct than thought. Engines roared, turrets swung, gunners steadied themselves in cramped, oil-scented darkness. A single muzzle flash turned the fog orange for a heartbeat. Then the battlefield vanished into grey once more. Arracourt became a series of violent surprises, clashes born from proximity and uncertainty. No sweeping manoeuvres, no grand cinematic movements, just bursts of chaos erupting inside a world where visibility stretched no farther than the length of a single tank. German Panthers fired into the mist, uncertain what lay ahead. American Shermans flanked through orchards so thick with fog that branches scraped against their armour like grasping hands. Infantry crawled across wet fields, their uniforms soaked through, rifles slick from dew. Artillery crews strained to aim blindly, relying on voices whispering through radios that crackled with static. But as the fog shifted, lifting slightly here, thickening there, the Americans began to see something the fog had hidden. The land favoured them. Small slopes, dips, and folds in the earth created perfect positions for ambush. The Germans could not see these features. The Americans already knew them intimately, and slowly Arracourt transformed. What began as confusion became opportunity. What began as survival became advantage. What began as a clash in the fog became one of the most decisive armoured victories the United States Army would ever achieve. But victory did not come easily. Tanks burned in the fields, their hulls glowing orange beneath the morning light. Smoke drifted across farmland, mingling with the endless fog until the sky and earth seemed the same colour. Crews abandoned disabled vehicles, stumbling across wet grass to find new positions. Medics knelt beside wounded men whose breath steamed in the cold air. Commanders fought exhaustion as fiercely as they fought the enemy. Arracourt was not a battle of glory. It was a battle of grit, of reading the land, listening to the unseen, and trusting instinct when everything else became uncertain. Tonight we return to that battlefield, to the fog that hid both danger and opportunity, to the engines growling in the damp morning, to the moments when shapes emerged from the grey and lives were decided in seconds, to the tank crews who fought not just with their machines, but with their nerves, their patience, and their refusal to give in. Before we move deeper into their story, I want to ask you something soft and simple, something only you can answer. Where in the world are you listening from right now? And what hour rests quietly around you? Is it late where you are, or just beginning to darken? And something deeper, unique to this episode, Arracourt teaches us that sometimes clarity comes only after moving through uncertainty. In your own life, has there been a moment when the path ahead looked foggy, but you kept going until something finally became clear? If you want, share what that moment taught you. And if these long, drifting journeys through the past help your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body unwind, consider subscribing. September 10th, 1944. The morning fog lifts over the Moselle River near Nancy, France, revealing a sight that would have seemed impossible 3 months earlier. American tanks, hundreds of them, their engines rumbling like distant thunder, roll eastward across bridges that German engineers had failed to destroy. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stands in the turret of his Sherman tank, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon where Lorraine's gentle hills fade into the haze. Behind him stretches Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, 11,000 men and nearly 200 tanks, the spearhead of General George Patton's Third Army. They have driven 400 miles in 30 days, a pace of advance that has shattered every assumption about modern warfare. The German army, supposedly invincible, has dissolved before them like morning mist. But Abrams feels uneasy. Something in the landscape ahead troubles him, though he cannot quite articulate what. The rolling farmland stretches endlessly, villages clustered around church steeples every few miles, forests dark against the autumn fields. It looks peaceful, almost pastoral, the kind of terrain that should favour attackers with mobility and speed. His maps show scattered German resistance ahead, remnants of broken divisions retreating toward the Rhine. Intelligence reports mention nothing significant. Yet Abrams has survived from North Africa through Sicily to France by trusting his instincts, and those instincts are whispering warnings. He drops back into his tank, keys the radio, and speaks to his company commanders. Stay sharp, keep your intervals, something doesn't feel right about this place. The 4th Armored Division represents the cutting edge of American military power in Europe. Its combat strength includes 186 M4 Sherman medium tanks, 77 M5 Stuart light tanks, and thousands of supporting vehicles ranging from tank destroyers to half-tracks carrying armoured infantry. The division has been specifically designed for rapid exploitation, breaking through enemy lines and racing deep into the rear to seize bridges, capture supply depots, and spread chaos. Since landing in France on July 12th, they have covered more ground than any other American unit, earning a reputation for aggressive leadership and tactical innovation. Patton calls them his best outfit, the division he trusts most when the situation demands speed and audacity. Their commander, Major General John Wood, has given his subordinates extraordinary freedom to improvise, creating a culture where junior officers are expected to think independently and act decisively. Yet for all their success, the 4th Armoured faces a crisis that has nothing to do with German resistance: fuel. The lifeblood of mechanized warfare flows through a supply system stretched to its breaking point. The Red Ball Express, a massive trucking operation running from Normandy to the front, delivers 12,500 tons of supplies daily, but the front has moved so fast that trucks consume nearly as much fuel as they deliver. Third Army requires 400,000 gallons of gasoline every day to maintain offensive operations. They are receiving 32,000 gallons. The mathematics are brutal and undeniable. Patton's advance, the most spectacular military achievement of the European war, is grinding to a halt, not because of enemy action, but because his tanks are running dry. Staff officers calculate that at current consumption rates, the 4th Armoured has perhaps a day and a half of offensive operations remaining before every vehicle stops moving. On September 12th, Combat Command A reaches a small crossroads village called Arracourt. The name means nothing to anyone. It sits on elevated ground overlooking farmland that slopes gently away in 3 directions, unremarkable except for its position at the intersection of several minor roads. Captain James Leach, commanding a company of Shermans, orders his tanks into defensive positions along the ridge, while infantry secure the village buildings. His men are exhausted. They have been in constant combat or movement for 60 days straight, sleeping in their tanks when they sleep at all, eating cold rations, washing when they can find streams. The village offers the promise of a brief rest. Perhaps they can requisionize some buildings, post guards, and let the crews sleep in beds for the first time in weeks. several tankers immediately begin searching for wine cellars, but Leach's trained eye notices something about this position that makes him pause. The ridge where Arracourt sits provides excellent fields of fire. To the north, east, and south, open ground extends for more than a kilometre, gentle slopes that any attacking force would have to cross under observation. To the west lies the village and the roads they arrived on, secure for now. The Forêt de Paroy, a substantial forest, looms several kilometres to the east, dark and potentially threatening. If the Germans have armour operating in this area, that forest is where they would stage attacks. From his position on the Arracourt Ridge, Leach can observe the entire eastern approach. He makes a note to ensure his tank commanders understand the terrain advantages they hold, then continues with the mundane business of establishing a defensive perimeter and organising supply distribution. September 18th arrives with no indication that anything has changed. The 4th Armoured Division has settled into what they assume will be a temporary pause, waiting for fuel trucks to arrive and resume the advance toward the German border. Men perform maintenance on their vehicles, cleaning weapons that have been fired daily for 2 months, replacing worn tracks, patching holes in the thin armour that somehow kept them alive. Some write letters home, carefully avoiding any mention of how vulnerable their Sherman tanks feel when facing German Panzers. Others sleep, the deep, exhausted sleep of men who have pushed themselves beyond normal human endurance. Captain Leach walks the perimeter, checking positions, making small adjustments, ensuring his company is prepared for whatever comes next. Then, in the late afternoon, German artillery shells begin falling near Arracourt. Not a barrage, not yet, just ranging shots. The kind of fire that indicates someone is registering targets for future use. The tankers scramble into their vehicles, engines roaring to life, turrets traversing as commanders scan for targets, but they see nothing. The shells stop as abruptly as they began. Radio chatter crackles across the battalion net as officers report the shelling to higher headquarters. The response comes back quickly. Intelligence has detected increased German activity in the area. Several panzer units, strength unknown, appear to be concentrating in the Forêt de Paroy. All units should remain alert for possible enemy action. The 4th Armoured Division, which thought it faced only scattered remnants, suddenly realises it may be about to fight a real battle. As darkness falls on September 18th, Lieutenant Colonel Abrams meets with his company commanders in a farmhouse that serves as his command post. Maps cover the table, marked with the positions of his 3 tank battalions and supporting units. The officers crowd around, smoking cigarettes, waiting for their commander to speak. Abrams stubs out his own cigarette and taps the map with one finger. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, "I think we're about to get hit hard. I don't know when, I don't know with what, but those aren't screening forces in that forest. That's a concentration, and concentrations mean attacks." He pauses, looking at each man in turn. "Make sure your boys are dug in, make sure they understand the fields of fire, and make sure they understand that we hold this ground. We don't have fuel to retreat even if we wanted to." The company commanders file out into the night, returning to their units to pass along the warning. In the darkness, tank crews work to improve their positions, using shovels to dig shallow pits that will allow their Shermans to fight hull down, protected by earth with only their turrets exposed. It is exhausting work, and the men grumble about it, but they do it anyway because they trust their officers. Somewhere in the darkness to the east, beyond the silent fields and the shadowy forest, German Panzer crews are making their own preparations. 2 armies, both veterans of years of warfare, both commanded by aggressive leaders, both convinced of their own superiority, are about to collide in a battle that neither expected. The Americans hold the high ground and the advantage of prepared positions. The Germans have superior tanks and the benefit of surprise. In 36 hours, this quiet corner of Lorraine will become a killing ground where more tanks will be destroyed than in any other single battle on the Western Front. But tonight, in the darkness of September 18th, 1944, the men of the 4th Armoured Division simply prepare their positions and wait for whatever dawn will bring. September 15th, 1944. Deep in the forests of East Prussia, in a compound of concrete bunkers and wooden buildings hidden beneath camouflage nets, Adolf Hitler leans over a map table and jabs his finger at a small circle marked Arracourt. His hand trembles slightly, the tremor that has become more pronounced in recent months, but his voice carries the same hypnotic intensity that has commanded armies and nations. Here, He says to the assembled generals and staff officers crowding the briefing room, "This is where we stop Patton. This is where we show the Americans that Germany still has teeth." The officers exchange glances. They have heard this before, this conviction that willpower and determination can overcome material disadvantage, but they also know better than to argue with the Führer when he is in this mood. The strategic situation confronting Germany in mid-September 1944 is catastrophic by any objective measure. In the east, Soviet armies have driven across Poland and are approaching the German border itself. In Italy, Allied forces grind northward through the Apennines. In the west, American and British armies have broken out of Normandy and raced across France, liberating Paris and driving toward the Rhine. The Wehrmacht, once seemingly invincible, has lost perhaps 2 million men in 3 months of defeats. Equipment losses are equally staggering. Thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of vehicles, irreplaceable aircraft. Yet Hitler refuses to acknowledge the reality that reasonable men can see clearly. He insists that one decisive counterstroke, properly executed, can reverse the tide of defeat. His generals know this is fantasy, but they also know that expressing such views is dangerous to one's health and career. Hitler's fixation on stopping Patton's Third Army has a perverse logic rooted in geography and paranoia. Patton's spearheads have reached Lorraine, a rolling landscape of farms and forests that stretches from Nancy eastward to the German border. Beyond Lorraine lies the Saverne Gap, a 15-mile-wide corridor through the Vosges Mountains that opens directly into the Rhine Valley and the industrial heart of Germany. If Patton breaks through the gap, nothing substantial stands between his tanks and the Rhine itself. German border cities like Saarbrücken and Karlsruhe would be directly threatened. The psychological impact of American tanks on German soil, Hitler believes, would be catastrophic to civilian morale. Therefore, Patton must be stopped in Lorraine, regardless of cost. The order goes out from the Wolf's Lair to Army Group to stop the American advance. Use whatever force is necessary. Failure is not acceptable. The man tasked with executing this impossible order is General Hermann Balck, one of the most capable and experienced commanders in the German army. At 50 years old, Balck has spent nearly his entire adult life in uniform, fighting in both world wars. His record is extraordinary even by German standards. Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, one of only 27 men to receive Germany's highest military honour. He has commanded at every level from company to corps, earning a reputation for tactical brilliance and operational audacity. His superiors call him a panzer genius. His subordinates respect his competence and his concern for their welfare. If anyone can stop Patton with inadequate forces, military logic suggests it would be Hermann Balck. But Balck himself harbours no illusions about the task ahead. On September 5th, Balck assumes command of 5th Panzer Army, a grandiose name for what is essentially a collection of battered remnants scraped together from 4 different armies destroyed in France. The order of battle looks impressive on paper: multiple panzer brigades, panzer grenadier divisions, corps headquarters. The reality is far less encouraging. The 111th Panzer Brigade numbers perhaps 60 tanks instead of its authorised 100. The 113th Panzer Brigade is only slightly better off with 88 panzers. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division has lost most of its vehicles and heavy weapons. Total strength of 5th Panzer Army amounts to perhaps 262 tanks and assault guns, a force that in earlier years would have been considered adequate for a limited offensive, but now must face an enemy with overwhelming superiority in numbers, air power, and logistics. Balck spends his first week in command, touring forward positions, meeting with subordinate commanders, assessing the actual combat capability of his new army. What he finds troubles him deeply. The tank crews are exhausted, many having retreated continuously from Normandy with only brief pauses for rest. Maintenance standards have collapsed under the pressure of constant movement, leaving perhaps only 60% of vehicles operational at any given time. Spare parts are almost non-existent. Ammunition stocks are adequate for perhaps 1 week of heavy combat. Fuel supplies, always the critical limitation for mechanized forces, amount to perhaps 8 days of operations if consumption is carefully managed. Most critically, the men have been beaten repeatedly over the summer and have lost the offensive spirit that characterized German armoured forces in earlier campaigns. Yet Balck also sees glimmers of hope. Many of his tank commanders are veterans with years of combat experience, survivors who have learned through brutal trial and error The Panther and Mark IV tanks that equip his brigades are superior in many respects to American Shermans, with better guns and heavier armor. German tactical doctrine emphasizes combined arms coordination and aggressive maneuver, principles that can sometimes overcome numerical disadvantage. If he can find the right ground at the right time with proper preparation, Balck believes he might achieve a local tactical success even if strategic victory is impossible. The question is where and when to strike. His intelligence officers brief him on American dispositions. Patton's Third Army has outrun its supply lines and paused near Nancy, its forward elements scattered across eastern Lorraine. The 4th Armored Division, Patton's best unit, has concentrated near a village called Arracourt. Balck studies his maps carefully. Arracourt sits on high ground with excellent observation. The terrain around it is relatively open, favouring long-range gunnery where German technological superiority might compensate for American numerical advantage. If he attacks quickly, before the Americans can consolidate, he might catch them unprepared. On September 16th, Balck issues his attack orders. 5th Panzer Army will advance on September 19th with the objective of destroying American forces near Arracourt and recapturing Nancy. The 113th Panzer Brigade will attack from the Forêt de Paroy directly toward Arracourt. The 111th Panzer Brigade will advance from the north. Supporting infantry will fix American forces in place, while the panzers execute a classic double envelopment. The operation, Balck emphasizes to his commanders, must be conducted with speed and aggression. The Americans must not be given time to bring their superior numbers to bear. His corps commanders nod their understanding, but privately several harbour doubts. They have been fighting Americans for 3 months now and have learned to respect their adaptability and firepower. The days when German tactical superiority alone could ensure victory are over. As the trains carrying his panzers rumble westward toward the concentration areas, Balck sits in his headquarters and writes in his personal journal, a habit he has maintained throughout the war. "We attack in 3 days." He writes, "with forces inadequate to the task, against an enemy who grows stronger daily, in terrain that favours the defender. A reasonable man would advise against this operation, but I am a soldier, not a politician, and soldiers execute orders regardless of personal assessment." He pauses, pen hovering over paper, then adds a final sentence, "Perhaps we will surprise them." Surprise has won battles before. He closes the journal and turns back to his maps, knowing that in 72 hours he will discover whether German skill and determination can still overcome American material power. The answer, though he does not yet know it, will reshape his understanding of modern warfare and haunt him for the rest of his life. September 19th, 1944, dawn. A French farmer named Claude Petitjean stands in the doorway of his stone farmhouse, 3 kilometers east of Arracourt village, and watches fog roll across his fields like a living thing. The mist rises from the low ground where a small stream meanders through the valley, thickening as it climbs the gentle slopes, swallowing everything in grey-white silence. By 6 o'clock, visibility has dropped to perhaps 30 meters. Petitjean has farmed this land for 40 years, inherited from his father who farmed it before him, and he knows these autumn fogs. They arrive most mornings in September, thick enough to blind, and burn off by 10 o'clock when the sun climbs high enough to warm the earth. In normal times, he would use this morning to begin harvesting his potatoes. But these are not normal times. American tanks sit in his fields, their crews sleeping in and around their vehicles. He can hear German vehicles moving somewhere to the east in the Forêt de Paroy, engines growling in the darkness. Petitjean retreats into his house and begins moving his family to the cellar. His wife protests that they have work to do, crops to harvest before winter comes, but he silences her with a look. He has lived through the First World War, has seen what happens when armies clash over farmland. The Americans on the ridge look confident, even cocky, sitting on their tanks, smoking cigarettes and joking in their incomprehensible language. The Germans in the forest sound numerous and angry. When confident armies meet angry ones on your land, the wise farmer goes underground and waits for the storm to pass. He herds his wife and 3 children down the cellar stairs, past shelves of preserved vegetables and hanging sausages, into the cool darkness that has protected his family for generations. Above them, the fog continues to thicken, and in that fog, 2 mechanized armies grope toward each other like blind giants. The landscape around Arracourt was shaped by millions of years of geology and 2,000 years of human agriculture into terrain that appears gentle but conceals deadly advantages for those who understand it. The village itself sits at 285 meters elevation, perhaps 40 to 60 meters higher than the surrounding farmland. This modest height difference creates commanding observation over approaches from three directions: north, east, and south. To the west lies more high ground and the roads back toward Nancy and safety. An attacking force approaching from the east, the direction of the Forêt de Paroy, where German armour is concentrating, must cross between 1,000 and 2,400 meters of open ground under observation from the Arracourt Ridge. There is no cover, no dead ground, no way to approach unseen once the fog lifts. The villages scattered across this landscape, Arracourt, Rechicourt, Lizay, Luneville, Bezange, Moncourt, sit roughly 2 to 3 kilometers apart, connected by minor roads that wind through farmland divided into fields of various sizes. Stone walls separate some fields, small streams cut shallow valleys through the terrain, patches of forest, remnants of the great woods that once covered all of Lorraine, provide the only substantial cover. The Forêt de Paroy, largest of these wooded areas, extends several kilometers east of Arracourt, dense enough to conceal large formations, but crossed by only a few roads suitable for tanks. Any armour emerging from Paroy must transition from the forest's concealment to open ground, a moment of vulnerability that competent defenders can exploit. American reconnaissance officers have spent several days studying this ground, measuring sight lines, identifying positions. A Sherman tank on the Arracourt Ridge can engage targets at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, significantly farther than the 200 to 400 meters typical in the Normandy bocage country, where thick hedgerows, limited visibility, the long sight lines favour gunnery skills, and potentially the Sherman's stabilised gun that allows reasonably accurate fire while moving. The elevation advantage means American gunners will be shooting slightly downhill at targets silhouetted against lower ground, a small edge but meaningful in tank combat where every advantage matters. Several officers note in their reports that if the Germans attack from the east, the ground heavily favours the defence. The question is whether the Germans will be foolish enough to attack from the east. Weather in Lorraine during September follows predictable patterns that both armies understand but cannot control. Cool nights and warm days create ideal conditions for radiation fog that forms in valleys and low ground after sunset and persists until mid-morning. This fog can be extraordinarily thick, reducing visibility to a few dozen meters, making coordinated movement nearly impossible, and navigation a matter of compass work and dead reckoning. Once the sun burns through, usually between 9 and 10 in the morning, visibility clears rapidly to the crisp clarity typical of early autumn. These conditions create a natural rhythm for combat operations: mornings blind and confused, afternoons clear and deadly. Both attackers and defenders must plan around weather they cannot control but can predict with reasonable accuracy. The civilian population trapped between these armies understands with bitter clarity what is coming. By mid-September, perhaps half the residents of Arracourt and surrounding villages have fled westward, joining the vast streams of refugees that have clogged French roads since June. Those who remain do so because they are too old, too stubborn, or too attached to land their families have worked for generations. They retreat to cellars and wait, knowing from experience that surface streets become no man's land when armies clash. Children are kept below ground. Livestock are hidden in barns, if possible, slaughtered if not. Valuables are buried. Families huddle together in underground rooms that smell of earth and fear, listening to the rumble of engines and trying to guess from sound alone which army is winning. On the evening of September 18th, an American artillery observer climbs the church steeple in Arracourt village and spends an hour studying the terrain through binoculars, making notes in a small notebook. From this elevated position, he can see even farther than the tanks on the ridge below, his view extending past Rechicourt to the dark line of the Forêt de Paroy. He identifies several features that will matter in the coming battle: a low ridge northeast of Arracourt that could provide covered approach routes, several small woodlots that might conceal anti-tank guns, the stream valleys where fog will be thickest in the morning. Most importantly, he maps out the killing zones, the areas of open ground where any vehicle that enters will be exposed to fire from multiple positions. He descends the steeple and briefs his battalion commander, on what he has seen. The commander nods slowly, understanding the implications. If they come from the east, the observer says, they'll be slaughtered. The commander responds, let's hope they're not that stupid. But they are that stupid, or more precisely, they have no choice. General Balk's intelligence officers have accurately identified Arracourt as a key American position that must be neutralized if 5th Panzer Army is to advance toward Nancy. They have correctly assessed that the 4th Armored Division is vulnerable, having outrun its supply lines and paused to await fuel. What they have failed to appreciate is that the Americans, almost by accident, have positioned themselves in the strongest defensive terrain in the entire region. The Germans will attack because orders demand it, because Hitler insists on stopping Patton, because sometimes in war you must attempt operations that doctrine and common sense advise against. At dawn on September 19th, German panzer crews will climb into their tanks in the Forêt de Paroy and advance westward, navigating by compass through fog toward an enemy they cannot see on ground that will kill them. The French farmers in their cellars will listen to the sounds of battle and pray. The Americans on the ridge will peer into the fog and wait for targets. And Lorraine's gentle landscape will reveal that terrain, seemingly so pastoral and innocent, can become a killing ground when armies collide. September 17th, 1944. General Hermann Balck stands on a dirt road at the edge of the Forêt de Paroy, watching his panzers arrive. The late afternoon sun slants through the trees, illuminating columns of dust raised by tracked vehicles maneuvering off the road into assembly areas. Panthers and Mark IVs, the medium tanks that represent Germany's best remaining armoured strength, grind past in endless succession, their exhausted crews staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard gaze of men who have seen too much combat. Balck counts vehicles instinctively, a habit from decades of command, and his count confirms what his staff has already reported. The 113th Panzer Brigade numbers 88 operational tanks, significantly below its authorised strength of 125. These numbers trouble him, but numbers alone do not win battles. He has won against worse odds. At 50 years old, Hermann Balck represents everything the Wehrmacht considers excellent in a combat commander. He joined the German army in 1913, fought as a young officer in the First World War, and remained in uniform through the interwar years when the Treaty of Versailles limited Germany to a skeleton force. He commanded infantry in Poland and France, distinguishing himself sufficiently to be given a panzer regiment for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. On the Eastern Front, Balck proved himself a master of armoured warfare, repeatedly achieving local victories against Soviet forces through superior tactics and operational speed. His 11th Panzer Division earned the nickname Ghost Division for its ability to appear unexpectedly, strike hard, and vanish before Soviet reinforcements could respond. By 1944, he has commanded at corps level and earned every decoration Germany can bestow on a soldier. Yet for all his accomplishments, Balck carries doubts that he shares with no one except his personal journal. The Eastern Front taught him certain truths about modern warfare that contradict the mythology of German invincibility. He learned that skill and courage matter, but logistics matter more. He learned that tactical brilliance can win battles but cannot overcome strategic incompetence. He learned that soldiers, even German soldiers trained to obey unto death, break under sufficient pressure. Most critically, he learned that the Wehrmacht of 1944 bears little resemblance to the force that stormed across Europe in 1940. The veterans are dead or crippled. The replacements are boys with inadequate training. The tanks are mechanical masterpieces that break down constantly due to rushed production. The fuel supplies that once seemed limitless now barely suffice for basic operations. His orders for the Arracourt offensive exemplify the contradiction between what Balck knows and what he must attempt. 5th Panzer Army is to attack on September 19th with objectives that include destroying American forces near Arracourt, recapturing Nancy, and preventing Patton from reaching the German border. The timeline allows 3 days for preparation. The allocated fuel provides perhaps 10 days of sustained combat operations, assuming consumption rates stay within planned parameters. Ammunition stocks are adequate but not generous. Air support will be non-existent. The Luftwaffe in this sector has been reduced to perhaps 30 operational aircraft against 3,000 Allied planes. Intelligence estimates indicate the Americans have paused due to fuel shortages and may be vulnerable to aggressive action. Balck gathers his subordinate commanders for a final conference on the evening of September 17th, They crowd into a farmhouse that serves as temporary headquarters, senior officers in muddy uniforms studying maps by lamplight. Colonel Hans Schmidt commands the 113th Panzer Brigade that will execute the main attack toward Arracourt. Colonel Friedrich von Sigroth leads the 111th Panzer Brigade, tasked with enveloping from the north. Division and corps commanders hover around the edges, smoking cigarettes, waiting for Balck to speak. When he does, his voice carries the crisp authority of a man who has issued orders under fire for 30 years. Gentlemen, he begins, we attack in 36 hours. I will not insult your intelligence by claiming this operation will be easy. We face a competent enemy with superior numbers and total air supremacy. Our advantages are tactical skill, superior tank quality, and the element of surprise. He taps the map with a wooden pointer, indicating the attack routes. Schmidt, your brigade advances directly on Arracourt from the east. The Americans occupy the high ground here, so you must close quickly before they can bring their numbers to bear. Speed is essential. Do not become involved in prolonged engagements with strongpoints. Bypass resistance and drive for the objective. The pointer moves north. Von Sigroth, your brigade, attacks from here, severing the American line of communications. Once both brigades have penetrated, we exploit rapidly toward Nancy. He pauses, looking at each commander in turn. Questions? The questions come, and they are good questions from experienced officers who understand combined arms warfare. What about American artillery? What about air support? What routes will supply columns use? What is the withdrawal plan if the attack fails? Balck answers each query with precision, demonstrating the thorough staff work that has gone into this operation. But one question hangs unasked in the cigarette smoke. Can this actually work? The officers are too professional to voice such doubts, but Balck sees the calculation in their eyes. They have fought Americans for 3 months now. They know American material superiority is overwhelming. They also know that German tactical doctrine, properly executed, can sometimes overcome material disadvantage. Sometimes, not always. After the conference, Balck walks alone through the forest, where his panzers are hidden beneath camouflage nets. Tank crews sleep on the ground beside their vehicles, wrapped in blankets against the September chill. Sentries challenge him, according to procedure, then snap to attention when they recognize the general's insignia. He waves them back to their posts and continues walking, passing between rows of tanks that represent Germany's last substantial armoured reserve in the west. The Panthers look formidable in the darkness, their long guns and sloped armour promising invincibility. But Balck knows the reality behind the appearance. These tanks are mechanically complex, prone to transmission failures and engine fires. Their crews are exhausted, their supporting infantry is under strength. The entire operation depends on achieving surprise and ending quickly before American advantages in numbers and firepower can be brought to bear. In his headquarters that night, Balck writes a final entry in his journal before the attack. September 17, 1944. Tomorrow we begin the offensive at Arracourt. My commanders are competent, my soldiers brave, my orders clear. Yet I cannot escape the certainty that we are attempting the impossible with inadequate means. A commander's duty is to express doubts during planning, then execute orders flawlessly, regardless of personal assessment. I have expressed my doubts to my superiors. They are noted and dismissed. Therefore, tomorrow we attack. Perhaps we will achieve surprise. Perhaps American fuel shortages have left them vulnerable. Perhaps tactical skill can overcome material disadvantage one more time. If not, this will be a very short offensive. He closes the journal, extinguishes the lamp, and lies down to sleep. In 2 days, he will learn that his doubts were entirely justified, that the Americans are not vulnerable, and that tactical skill alone cannot overcome the combination of prepared defences, superior numbers, and total air supremacy. The Battle of Arracourt will become, in his own later assessment, the most frustrating defeat of his career. A battle he knew he should not fight, fought brilliantly within his constraints, and lost anyway because the constraints were impossible. September 14th, 1944, Staff Sergeant Thomas Riley stands beside his Sherman tank near Arracourt and watches a replacement crew arrive. 5 young men, fresh from training schools in England, their uniforms still clean, their expressions mixing excitement and fear. Riley has commanded Sherman tanks since North Africa, has survived campaigns that killed most of his original battalion, and knows with bitter certainty what these boys do not yet understand. Their tank is a death trap. The M4 Sherman, affectionately nicknamed Ronson, by crews who know that Ronson cigarette lighters advertise "lights first time, every time," has a well-earned reputation for burning when hit. German gunners call them Tommy Cookers. Riley calls them what they are: the best tank America can build in sufficient numbers to win the war. Which means it is adequate but not good, numerous but not survivable, and the only thing standing between Nazi Germany and continued existence. The Sherman's fundamental design reflects American industrial philosophy and strategic requirements that have nothing to do with crew survival. It was designed in 1941, when American planners believed tank versus tank combat would be rare, and the primary mission would be supporting infantry and exploiting breakthroughs. It weighs 33 tons, light enough to be transported across oceans in large numbers and carried by most bridges. Its Continental R975 radial engine, originally designed for aircraft, is reliable and easy to maintain. Its 75mm gun, mounted in a fully traversable turret, can fire high explosive shells effectively against infantry and fortifications. By 1941 standards, it is an excellent design. By 1944 standards, facing German Panthers and Tigers, it is dangerously obsolete. The armor statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. The Sherman's frontal hull armor measures 2 inches thick, angled to improve effective protection but still vulnerable to most German anti-tank weapons. The turret face is slightly thicker at 3 inches. Side armor measures barely 1.5 inches, enough to stop rifle bullets but penetrated easily by any anti-tank gun. Ammunition storage: 30 to 40 rounds of 75mm shells, depending on variant, is distributed around the crew compartment, some in the turret, some in the hull floor, some on the sides. Early production Shermans stored this ammunition dry, surrounded only by air, meaning a penetrating hit that struck ammunition would almost certainly cause catastrophic explosion. Crew survivability in such incidents measured close to 0%. German tanks, by contrast, reflect a different philosophy that prioritizes protection and firepower over mobility and numbers. The Panther, introduced in 1943 after hard lessons on the Eastern Front, mounts a 75mm KWK-42 gun that fires shells at far higher velocity than the Sherman's gun. This German weapon can penetrate the Sherman's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The Sherman's 75mm gun can penetrate a Panther's frontal armor only at point-blank range, perhaps 200 meters or less, essentially requiring suicide charges. Against side armor, the Sherman has better chances, penetrating Panthers reliably at 600 to 800 meters. This disparity means Sherman crews must either ambush German tanks from the flank or accept catastrophic casualties, trading shots frontally. Veteran American tankers have developed tactics and psychology to survive in vehicles they know are outmatched. The fundamental rule is simple: never engage German heavy tanks frontally if any alternative exists. Shermans hunt in packs, using their superior numbers and radio communication to coordinate flanking maneuvers. One Sherman draws fire and attention, while others circle to shoot the enemy's vulnerable side armor. American tank destroyers, thinly armored but mounting powerful guns, engage German tanks at long range while Shermans maneuver for killing shots. Artillery and air support suppress German tanks, preventing them from concentrating on individual Shermans. Above all, Sherman crews rely on speed, mechanical reliability, and the certain knowledge that for every Sherman destroyed, 3 more will arrive as replacements. The psychological burden of climbing into a Ronson lighter every morning weighs on crew morale in ways that official reports rarely capture. Replacement crews arrive having heard the stories, the grim jokes, the statistics. They know that tank crewmen have higher casualty rates than almost any other combat arm. They know that being trapped in a burning tank means death by immolation, that hatches jam, that ammunition explodes, that some crews burn so completely that identification is impossible. They know because veterans tell them not to frighten them but to prepare them, to strip away illusions that will get them killed. Sergeant Riley tells his new crew exactly what he told his previous crews, most of whom are now dead. This tank will not protect you from German guns. What will protect you is speed, tactics, and never, ever trading shots with a Panther frontally. Yet, American tankers also possess advantages that statistics do not fully capture. Their training, though shorter than German training in earlier war years, emphasizes individual initiative and technical competence. Every crew member can perform multiple jobs. Radio communication means every tank can coordinate with every other tank instantly, a capability German tanks lack since only command vehicles carry radios. Mechanical reliability means American tanks stay operational far longer between maintenance periods. Supply chains ensure that damaged Shermans are repaired quickly, often returning to service within 48 hours, while German tanks requiring major repairs might wait weeks for parts that never arrive. Most critically, American tankers know they are winning the war, that every battle brings victory closer, that their sacrifices serve a cause that will ultimately triumph. By September 1944, the worst vulnerability of early Shermans has been partially addressed through the introduction of wet stowage for ammunition. This modification surrounds ammunition bins with water glycol jackets that absorb heat and suppress fires. Statistics show that wet stowage Shermans burn after penetrating hits only 15% of the time, compared to 80% for earlier models. The improvement is dramatic and significant, though still far from ideal. Some Shermans arriving in Europe now mount 76mm guns with improved penetration, though even these cannot match German guns for armor-piercing capability. Crews receiving these upgraded tanks express cautious optimism, understanding that less likely to burn is not the same as safe. On the evening of September 18th, Sergeant Riley gathers his crew for their final briefing before what intelligence suggests will be a German attack. They sit on the ground beside their Sherman, 5 men who have trained together for 3 months and fought together for 30 days. Riley looks at each face in turn: his gunner, a farm boy from Iowa with uncanny aim; his loader, a former mechanic from Detroit who keeps the gun fed with mechanical precision; his driver, a cautious professional who has learned to coax maximum speed from the Sherman's engine; his assistant driver who also operates the bow machine gun. Gentlemen, Riley says quietly, we're probably getting hit tomorrow. Intel thinks the Germans have Panzers in that forest. Maybe Panthers, maybe Mark IVs. We don't know yet. He pauses, letting them absorb this. Here's what we do know. We hold the high ground, we have good fields of fire, and we've been fighting these bastards long enough to know their tricks. Our tank isn't the best, but we are. That'll be enough. The crew nods, not reassured exactly, but steady. They climb into their sleeping bags beneath the Sherman's hull, seeking what rest they can find before dawn brings whatever the morning will bring. Above them, their tank looms in the darkness, 33 tons of welded steel and mechanical complexity, inadequate protection against what is coming, but the only protection they have. September 18th, 1944, Captain Robert Morrison, Quartermaster Officer for Combat Command A, 4th Armoured Division, sits at a requisition table in a French farmhouse and performs calculations that will determine whether his unit fights or retreats. The numbers are unforgiving. His command requires approximately 12,000 gallons of gasoline daily to maintain defensive operations, fuel for tanks, half-tracks, trucks, jeeps, and generators. Offensive operations would require double that amount. Current stocks, distributed across various supply points and unit reserves, total 18,000 gallons. At defensive consumption rates, that represents 1.5 days of operations. At offensive rates, roughly 18 hours. The fuel situation, Morrison concludes with grim certainty, is catastrophic. The fuel crisis afflicting Third Army in September 1944 stems from a success so dramatic it overwhelmed its own logistics. When American forces broke out of Normandy in late July, planners assumed a methodical advance through France, pausing periodically to consolidate supply lines and bring forward fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. Instead, German resistance collapsed. Patton's tanks raced eastward at speeds approaching 50 miles per day, covering in weeks what pre-war plans allocated months to achieve. The advance was spectacular, strategically decisive, and logistically impossible to sustain. Every mile forward stretched supply lines another mile longer. Every day of advance consumed fuel that should have been stockpiled for future operations. By mid-September, Third Army has advanced so fast that its supply system, designed for a different kind of war, has snapped under the strain. The Red Ball Express, the massive trucking operation that supplies all Allied armies from Normandy to the front, represents one of the great logistical achievements of the war. More than 6,000 trucks, driven mostly by African-American soldiers, run in continuous loops from supply depots on the invasion beaches to forward distribution points, carrying fuel, ammunition, food, and equipment. They drive day and night on roads reserved exclusively for military traffic, racing along highways cleared of civilian vehicles, maintaining speeds that destroy trucks and exhaust drivers but keep armies moving. At peak efficiency, the Red Ball Express delivers 12,500 tons of supplies daily. It is an impressive achievement made meaningless by simple mathematics. The trucks consume nearly as much fuel as they deliver. Third Army's daily requirement of 400,000 gallons of gasoline serves an army group of 250,000 soldiers, operating thousands of vehicles across a front, hundreds of miles wide. Supply planners in England, making allocation decisions for all Allied armies, have prioritized First Army, which is advancing toward Aachen and the German border from the north. First Army Commander General Courtney Hodges receives his requested fuel allocations. Third Army Commander General George Patton receives what remains, typically less than 10% of his requirements. The strategic logic is sound. First Army advances toward Germany's industrial heartland and will reach the Siegfried Line first. Third Army, operating farther south through more difficult terrain, is a secondary effort despite Patton's protests. Patton's solution has been to advance anyway, consuming fuel allocated for future operations, gambling that success will justify his insubordination. By September 18th, the gambling has caught up with him. The German fuel situation, remarkably, is even worse. 5th Panzer Army's quartermaster staff calculates total fuel stocks at 750,000 gallons, sufficient for perhaps 8 to 10 days of sustained combat operations. This assumes ideal conditions. No fuel wasted on administrative movement, no losses to Allied air attacks, no vehicles breaking down and requiring evacuation. In reality, fuel consumption in combat typically exceeds planning estimates by 30 to 50%. A Panther tank, Germany's most capable medium tank, consumes approximately 2.5 gallons per mile, meaning a 50-mile approach march depletes 125 gallons before the vehicle even reaches combat. The round trip from assembly areas in the Forêt de Paroy to Arracourt and back represents perhaps 20 miles, consuming 60 gallons per tank. Multiply by 88 Panthers in 113th Panzer Brigade, and the approach march alone costs over 5,000 gallons. On the afternoon of September 18th, German fuel officers brief General Balk on their projections. The briefing is blunt, delivered by professional logistics officers who understand their commander needs truth, not optimism. Sir, the senior quartermaster reports, current fuel stocks provide approximately 10 days of operations at planned consumption rates. However, we must account for inevitable wastage, vehicles breaking down and requiring recovery, and the possibility that combat will exceed planning assumptions. Realistic assessment: we have fuel for one major offensive operation, perhaps two at most, before the army becomes immobile. Balk listens without comment, then dismisses the officers with instructions to prepare detailed daily consumption reports. After they leave, he sits alone with his maps and makes his own calculations. 10 days, perhaps less. Enough time to attack, to fight, perhaps to achieve something before the tanks simply stop moving. American tankers, oblivious to German fuel problems that mirror their own, focus on more immediate concerns. Company commanders organize details to collect fuel from any available source, abandoned German vehicles, French civilian stocks, even local farmers who might have cached gasoline during the occupation. These scrounging operations yield small amounts, perhaps a few hundred gallons, enough to keep a company operational for another day. Tank crews learn to conserve fuel obsessively, idling engines only when necessary, planning routes to minimize distance, coasting down hills instead of braking. Some crews become adept at pushing disabled tanks into position rather than towing them, saving fuel at the cost of exhausted muscles. The ammunition situation, though less desperate than fuel, also constrains both armies. American supply doctrine allocates specific daily ammunition allowances for each weapon system: 5 rounds per day per tank main gun, 10 rounds per mortar, 20 rounds per machine gun. These allocations reflect complex calculations about industrial production, shipping capacity, and average consumption rates in combat. They are also utterly inadequate for sustained, high-intensity tank battles. A single engagement lasting 3 hours can consume 30 to 40 rounds per tank gun, 6 to 8 days' worth of allocations. Forward units, recognizing the inadequacy of official allocations, hoard ammunition whenever possible, hiding caches that enable them to fight beyond what official stocks would permit. German ammunition stocks reflect the systematic degradation of German industry under Allied strategic bombing. Production of 75mm tank ammunition has declined 30% from 1943 levels due to destroyed factories and disrupted transportation networks. Quality control has declined as experienced workers are drafted and replaced with forced labourers who sometimes sabotage production. Some German units report that up to 10% of delivered ammunition fails to fire or explodes prematurely. These quality problems force German gunners to carry more rounds to achieve the same effect, compounding supply difficulties. 5th Panzer Army's ammunition stocks are adequate for perhaps 1 week of intensive combat, after which tanks will continue fighting, but with severely restricted fire discipline. As darkness falls on September 18th, both armies face the same fundamental constraint. They are about to fight a major tank battle with fuel stocks that allow perhaps 1 week of sustained combat before both sides become immobile. This constraint will shape every tactical decision in the coming days. Commanders on both sides understand that maneuver consumes fuel, that aggressive operations deplete stocks rapidly, that there is no strategic reserve waiting to bail out units that overextend. The battle they are about to fight will be decided as much by fuel gauges as by tactical skill. In previous wars, exhausted armies paused to rest and refit. In mechanized warfare, exhausted armies simply stopped moving, their tanks transformed from mobile firepower into stationary pillboxes as fuel tanks drained to empty. Neither side yet realizes that this battle will end not because one army defeats the other, but because both simultaneously run out of fuel. The Americans will run out second, which means they will win. But on September 18th, with fuel stocks measured in days, not weeks, both armies prepare to fight what resources they have, knowing that time itself has become a weapon pointed at both their hearts. September 19th, 1944, 0600 hours. Fog blankets the Lorraine countryside in a grey shroud so thick that visibility drops below 30 meters. In the Forêt de Parouille, German tank crews climb into their Panthers and Mark IVs, breath misting in the pre-dawn chill, trying to ignore the fear that tightens every stomach. Oberleutnant Karl Weber, commanding a platoon of 5 Panthers in 113th Panzer Brigade, checks his compass, bearing one final time, trying to memorize the azimuth that should lead directly to Arracourt. Without visibility, navigation becomes a matter of dead reckoning and prayer. He keys his intercom, driver, advance, maintain heading 270, gunner, load armor piercing. Everyone stay alert. The Panther lurches forward, its engine roaring, blind in the fog. 4 kilometers west, on the Arracourt Ridge, Sergeant Thomas Riley sits in his Sherman's commander's hatch and stares into the impenetrable mist. His gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver wait silently inside the tank, hatches cracked open to improve visibility and provide escape routes if they are hit. Riley has positioned his tank in a slight depression that provides hull-down protection, only the turret exposed above ground level. From here, he should have clear fields of fire across the eastern approaches once visibility improves. Should have. Right now, he can barely see the next tank in line, 20 meters away. If the Germans attack in this fog, the battle will become a confused knife fight at point-blank range. Riley keys his radio. All tanks, stay on your gun sights. The second this fog lifts, we're going to have targets. Between 0600 and 0800 hours, the opposing forces grope toward each other like blind wrestlers. German tank columns advance slowly, trying to maintain formation in the fog, guided only by compass bearings and the sounds of neighbouring vehicles. The lead elements of 113th Panzer Brigade emerge from the Forêt de Parouille and move onto open ground without realising they have left cover. Company and platoon commanders navigate by estimated time and distance. They began at grid coordinates known to be inside the forest. They have driven west at approximately 10 kilometers per hour for 12 minutes. Therefore, they should now be approaching the midpoint between the forest edge and Arracourt. The mathematics are sound, but navigation by dead reckoning accumulates errors. Some companies drift north or south of their intended axis. Others advance too far or not far enough. The carefully planned assault begins to fragment as units lose contact in the fog. At 0800 hours, the fog begins to thin. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. visibility extending from 30 meters to 50, then to 100. Sunlight starts penetrating the grey shroud, revealing the landscape in patches. On the Arracourt Ridge, American tank commanders see movement to the east, dark shapes resolving out of the mist. At first, the shapes are indistinct, possibly trees or buildings. Then they move, and there is no doubt tanks, dozens of them. Panthers and Mark IVs advancing in company formations, now perhaps 800 to 1,000 meters distant, still partially obscured by lingering fog. The German tanks are moving across open ground, exposed, their commanders apparently unaware that American defenders have clear observation from elevated positions. The American response is instant and devastating. Riley sees a Panther at approximately 1,000 meters, its profile unmistakable even through the thinning fog. He drops into his tank, grabbing the commander's override controls. Gunner, target tank, 11 o'clock, 1,000 meters. His gunner acquires the target, the 76mm gun, traversing smoothly. Identified, Riley makes minute adjustments to the gun laying, compensating for range and the slight downhill angle. Fire. The gun recoils, the Sherman rocking backward from the shock. Through his optics, Riley sees the tracer arc toward the target and strike the Panther's side armor. The German tank shudders, stops moving, begins to smoke. Target destroyed. Next target, 12 o'clock, 900 meters. The loader slams another round into the breach. The killing has begun. All along the Arracourt Ridge, American tanks engage simultaneously. The battlefield erupts in fire, as perhaps 40 Shermans fire at German armor, still struggling to identify targets through the lingering fog. The Germans have advanced into a pre-registered kill zone, their approach routes covered by overlapping fields of fire from hull-down positions. American gunners, many veterans of months of combat, pick their targets methodically. They aim for side armor when possible, knowing that Sherman guns lack the penetrating power to damage Panther frontal armor at these ranges. They fire, observe, impact, reload, fire again. The practice routine of gunnery drill becomes mass slaughter as German tanks, caught in the open, begin to burn. The German formation disintegrates within 20 minutes. Oberleutnant Weber sees his platoon destroyed around him. His second tank explodes, its turret blown 30 meters into the air by ammunition detonation. His third tank stops moving, flames pouring from the engine compartment. His fourth tank reverses desperately, trying to reach cover, and is hit 3 times before traveling 50 meters. Weber's own Panther survives only because he immediately orders withdrawal, his driver reversing at maximum speed back toward the forest. Through his vision slits, Weber watches as the carefully planned assault becomes a massacre. Tanks burn across a kilometer of farmland. Crewmen bail out of disabled vehicles and run, some cut down by machine gun fire. The fog, which was supposed to provide cover for the approach, has lifted at exactly the wrong moment, exposing the attackers to defenders they cannot effectively engage. By 0900 hours, the first engagement at Arracourt is effectively over. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which began the attack with 88 operational tanks, has lost 43 destroyed or disabled. The surviving Panthers and Mark IVs retreat in disorder back to the Forêt de Paroy, their crews in shock. American losses total 4 Shermans damaged, 0 destroyed. The kill ratio, more than 10 to 1 in American favour, is unprecedented in the European theatre. Riley climbs out of his Sherman and lights a cigarette with shaking hands, staring across the killing ground where German tanks still burn, sending columns of black smoke into the clearing sky. His loader emerges from the turret, vomits over the side of the tank, then sits down heavily. Jesus Christ, the loader whispers. It was like a shooting gallery. Riley doesn't respond. He has seen enough combat to know that easy victories are anomalies, that the Germans will adapt, that the next engagement will not be this one-sided. But for now, in this moment, watching the enemy retreat in flames, he allows himself to believe that perhaps American tanks and American tactics can win this battle. In the Forêt de Paroy, General Balk receives reports of the disaster and feels the cold certainty of miscalculations settle in his gut. His brigade commander is nearly incoherent, shouting into the radio about ambush and slaughter. Balk silences him with cold authority. Colonel, report your strength and positions, emotion later. The numbers, when they come, confirm catastrophe. One of his two assault brigades has been shattered in the first engagement, losing half its combat power before achieving any objectives. The Americans hold the high ground, have excellent observation, and clearly prepared their defences thoroughly. Balk's plan, based on achieving surprise and overwhelming local defenders before they could react, has failed completely, yet orders demand he continue the attack. He sits in his headquarters, studying maps by lamplight, and begins the work of adaptation. If frontal assault across open ground results in massacre, he will find another approach. The battle is lost, perhaps, but not yet over. He has been in impossible situations before and survived through tactical innovation. Perhaps he can do so again. September 19th, 1944, 2100 hours. In a commandeered French farmhouse deep in the Forêt de Paroy, General Hermann Balck sits across a table from Colonel Hans Schmidt, commander of the shattered 113th Panzer Brigade, and listens with increasing anger as Schmidt attempts to explain the morning's disaster. "Sir, the fog lifted at exactly the wrong moment. We were caught in the open. The Americans had hull-down positions. Our crews never had a chance." Balck interrupts, his voice cold and precise. "Colonel, tell me this. Did you conduct reconnaissance before the attack?" Schmidt hesitates. "Sir, the fog made reconnaissance impossible." Balck leans forward. "Then you should have waited for visibility before advancing. You led 88 tanks across open ground toward an enemy position you had not reconnoitred, in a formation that allowed no mutual support across terrain that you did not understand. That is not bad luck, Colonel, that is incompetence." The rebuke is harsh, but necessary. Balck has commanded armoured forces long enough to distinguish between unavoidable battlefield losses and failures of basic tactical judgment. The morning attack violated fundamental principles of armoured warfare: reconnaissance before commitment, combined arms coordination, use of terrain to minimise exposure. Schmidt's brigade advanced blindly in column formation across a killing ground and paid the predictable price. The Americans did nothing extraordinary. They simply occupied good defensive terrain and executed basic gunnery. The disaster resulted from German failure, not American superiority. This realization, paradoxically, gives Balck hope. If German mistakes caused the defeat, German corrections might achieve success. He dismisses Schmidt with orders to reorganize his brigade and prepare for further operations. Then turns to his staff. "Gentlemen, we will analyze what happened and determine how to avoid repeating it." The after-action analysis extends past midnight as staff officers piece together the morning battle from survivor accounts and radio logs. The pattern becomes clear. The 113th Panzer Brigade advanced on schedule but lost formation cohesion in the fog. Companies and platoons drifted apart, some straying from the planned axis of advance. When visibility improved, German tanks found themselves dispersed across the open ground east of Arracourt, unable to support each other, presenting individual targets to dug-in defenders. American fire discipline was excellent, multiple tanks engaging each German vehicle to ensure kills. German return fire was ineffective, partly due to continuing fog, and partly because American tanks were hull down behind cover. The entire engagement lasted approximately 40 minutes, by which point the attack had collapsed. Balck studies maps by lamplight, measuring distances, identifying terrain features, tracing potential approach routes. His staff watches silently, accustomed to their commander's method of working through tactical problems by visual analysis. After perhaps 30 minutes, Balck straightens and taps the map with one finger. "Here is our mistake," he says quietly. "We attacked directly across terrain that favoured the defence in daylight when American observation was excellent. The Americans chose this ground deliberately. They want us to attack frontally because it allows them to use their numbers and their firepower from protected positions." He pauses, then continues. "Therefore, we will not attack frontally. We will infiltrate at night, we will attack from multiple directions simultaneously, and we will close to ranges where their numerical superiority cannot be brought to bear." The new plan takes shape over the next several hours. Instead of mass daylight attacks across open ground, German forces will conduct multiple simultaneous infiltrations under cover of darkness. Small combined arms teams, each consisting of 4 to 6 tanks supported by infantry and engineers, will advance using terrain for concealment and achieve positions close to American lines before dawn. At first light, these teams will attack from multiple axes simultaneously, penetrating the American defense before defenders can concentrate their superior numbers. The tactics Bulk is describing are standard German doctrine for offensive operations against prepared defenses, methods proved on both the eastern and western fronts. The question is whether his exhausted, depleted units can execute complex night operations after the morning's disaster. Colonel Friedrich von Segroth, commanding the 111th Panzer Brigade that did not participate in the morning attack, expresses cautious optimism. "Sir, my brigade remains at full strength. If we conduct the infiltration tonight, we can attack at dawn tomorrow. Give me 12 hours for preparation and movement." Balk considers this, then shakes his head. "Too rushed. The men need rest. We attack the night of September 20th, 30 hours from now. That gives us time to plan properly, brief all commanders, and position forces correctly." Von Segroth nods acceptance. The extended timeline also provides additional opportunity for reconnaissance, gathering information about American positions that should have been obtained before the first attack. Throughout September 20th, German reconnaissance teams observe American positions from concealed positions in the forest. They note defensive layouts, identify command posts, track vehicle movements, map artillery positions. The intelligence they gather confirms Balk's assessment. American defenses are strongest facing east toward the Forêt de Péroy, where the morning attack originated. Defenses facing north and south appear less developed, possibly vulnerable to infiltration. American patrols are active but predictable, following regular routes and schedules. The defenders appear confident, perhaps overconfident after their morning victory. This intelligence will shape the evening attack. As darkness falls on September 20th, German assault teams begin their infiltrations. The approach is methodical and professional, each team advancing slowly, using covered routes, maintaining radio silence, navigating by compass and dead reckoning. Balk has insisted on thorough briefings and rehearsals, ensuring every tank commander and infantry squad leader understands the plan and his role within it. The infiltration takes hours, vehicles moving cautiously through darkness without headlights, guided by dismounted infantry scouts who clear routes and mark obstacles. By 0300 hours on September 21st, German forces have achieved positions much closer to American lines than the attack force had reached the previous morning, all without detection. The attack begins at 0530, still in darkness, with German teams assaulting from three directions simultaneously. The Americans, expecting any attack to come from the east in daylight, are caught partially unprepared. Fighting erupts across the Arracourt perimeter as German tanks and infantry penetrate the defensive line at multiple points. The engagement quickly becomes chaotic, a confused melee in darkness, where identification is difficult and coordinated defense nearly impossible. Some American positions are overrun before crews realize they are under attack. Others fight desperate close-range actions, Sherman guns depressing to minimum elevation to engage Panthers at ranges of 50 to 100 meters. The battle that ensues bears no resemblance to the previous morning's long-range gunnery exercise. This is brutal, intimate combat where tactical skill matters more than technological superiority. By 0900 hours, when daylight finally permits clear assessment, both sides have suffered significant casualties. The Germans have penetrated approximately 2 kilometers into American positions and hold several key crossroads. American defenders have prevented any complete breakthrough but have lost 14 Shermans destroyed and approximately 80 infantry casualties. German losses are lighter than the previous day, but still substantial. 21 Panzers destroyed and perhaps 300 infantry casualties. More importantly, the psychological impact differs completely. The Americans, supremely confident after their easy victory on September 19th, have been shaken by the ferocity and sophistication of the night attack. The Germans, demoralized by the morning massacre, have recovered confidence through tactical success. The battle, both sides realize, is far from over. General Balk's adaptation has restored operational balance. The question now is whether the Americans can counter-adapt as quickly as the Germans just demonstrated. September 21st, 1944, 1900 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams sits on an ammunition crate outside his command post, a captured German farmhouse 2 kilometers west of Arracourt, and listens to his company commander's report on the previous night's German attack. The officers stand or crouch in a loose circle, their uniforms muddy and smoke-stained, their faces showing the strain of 36 hours of continuous combat. Captain James Leach describes how German tanks penetrated his positions in darkness, forcing hand-to-hand fighting before dawn. Captain Robert Thompson explains how his reserve platoon counterattacked and restored the line but lost 4 Shermans doing it. The reports continue, each adding details to a picture that troubles Abrams deeply. The Germans have adapted faster than he expected, changing tactics completely between the first and second attacks. Abrams lets his officers finish their reports without interruption, a leadership technique he learned decades ago. When the last captain concludes, Abrams pulls a cigar from his pocket, lights it deliberately, and blows smoke into the evening air. The gesture is theatrical but serves a purpose, giving everyone a moment to breathe before he speaks. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice carrying the flat vowels of his Massachusetts upbringing, "we got our asses kicked last night. Not badly, we held, but we got outfought by an enemy we'd beaten easily the day before." He pauses, looking at each officer in turn. "Anyone want to tell me why?" The question hangs in the air. Finally, Captain Leach speaks. "Sir." They changed their approach completely. Night infiltration, multiple axes, close assault. We were set up for the wrong battle. Abrams nods slowly. "Exactly right. We prepared for a repeat of September 19th. They gave us something completely different. That's on me, as much as anyone. But here's the important question. What do we do about it?" The discussion that follows reveals why the 4th Armored Division has earned its reputation for tactical excellence. Abrams does not lecture his subordinates or issue detailed orders. Instead, he facilitates a conversation where junior officers propose solutions, critique each other's ideas, and gradually build consensus around approaches that might work. This style of leadership, radical by the standards of most armies, reflects Abrams' fundamental belief that good ideas can come from anyone, regardless of rank, and that officers who participate in planning execute more effectively than those who merely receive orders. Captain Thompson, a former enlisted man commissioned from the ranks, suggests positioning roving tank destroyer teams behind the front line to intercept German penetrations. "Sir, if they're going to infiltrate close and attack at dawn, we need mobile reserves that can respond quickly once we identify penetration points. The M18 Hellcats can move fast enough to reach any sector within minutes." Abrams considers this, then nods. "Good. Work out the details with the tank destroyer battalion commander." "What else?" Another captain proposes improving night observation by positioning listening posts forward of the main line, infantry teams that can detect German infiltrations and call artillery fire. A third officer suggests keeping a higher percentage of tanks at full readiness through the night, accepting the crew exhaustion that entails but ensuring rapid response capability. The meeting extends past 2 hours as the group works through tactical adjustments for the next German attack, which everyone assumes is coming soon. Abrams contributes ideas, but mostly asks questions, pushing his officers to think through second and third order effects of their proposals. When someone suggests concentrating all tanks on the eastern sector where both German attacks originated, Abrams challenges the assumption, what if that's what they want us to do? What if the next attack comes from the north or south? The question forces reconsideration, leading to a more balanced defensive scheme. By the time the meeting concludes, the 4th Armored Division has a revised defensive plan that incorporates lessons from both German attacks and addresses identified vulnerabilities. The contrast between American and German command culture, subtle but significant, shapes how each army adapts to changing battlefield conditions. German doctrine emphasizes vertical authority and detailed orders from senior commanders. Junior officers execute their assigned missions with skill and courage but rarely deviate from established plans. Initiative is encouraged within defined parameters but constrained by rigid hierarchical structures. General Balk, brilliant though he is, must personally direct tactical adjustments because his subordinates lack authority to implement changes independently. The American approach, by contrast, pushes decision-making authority down to the lowest practical level. Company commanders like Captain Leach can modify their defensive schemes without seeking approval from battalion headquarters. Platoon leaders can reposition tanks based on their tactical judgment. This decentralization creates risks. Poorly trained or incompetent junior officers can make disastrous decisions but also enables rapid adaptation. The technical advantages American forces enjoy compound their doctrinal flexibility. Every American tank carries a radio, allowing instant communication between vehicles and coordination of fire. German tanks, by contrast, typically have radios only in command vehicles, meaning platoon and company commanders must communicate through hand signals or by physically moving between tanks. The American radio advantage enables tactics impossible for German forces. Simultaneous engagement of single targets by multiple tanks, rapid concentration against breakthrough attempts, real-time coordination between tanks and infantry. During the confused night fighting on September 21st, American tank commanders used radio to track friendly and enemy positions, preventing fratricide and enabling coordinated counterattacks that would have been impossible without instant communication. On the evening of September 21st, the tactical adjustments decided in the command meeting begin implementation immediately. Tank destroyer crews receive briefings on their new roving reserve mission and begin planning patrol routes that cover likely German infiltration paths. Infantry listening posts move forward after dark. Two-man teams equipped with radios, positioning themselves in concealment 200 to 300 meters ahead of the main defensive line. Tank crews adjust their night readiness posture, keeping more vehicles fully manned with engines warm, accepting the crew exhaustion this requires, but gaining response time. The defensive system that emerges from these adjustments is more flexible and resilient than the static scheme that the Germans penetrated the previous night. September 22nd brings the test of American adaptability. German forces, following Balk's refined tactics, attempt another multi-axis night infiltration similar to the previous attack. But this time, American listening posts detect the German approach hours before dawn and call artillery fire on probable assembly areas. When German assault teams attempt to close with American positions, they encounter roving tank destroyer teams that have positioned themselves along likely infiltration routes. The M18 Hellcats, mounting 76mm guns and capable of 55 miles per hour on roads, proved devastatingly effective in this role. They engage German tanks at close range from ambush positions, destroy or disable their targets, then relocate before German forces can respond. The fluid, aggressive defense disrupts German attack timing and prevents the kind of deep penetrations achieved the previous day. The engagement on September 22nd lasts nearly 8 hours, from 0300 to 1100, and results in roughly equal casualties for both sides. 17 German tanks destroyed, 12 American tanks destroyed, plus proportional infantry losses. The statistical outcome suggests a draw, but the tactical result favors the Americans. The Germans failed to achieve their objectives, failed to penetrate American positions significantly, and expended scarce fuel and ammunition without strategic gain. More importantly, the German commanders recognized that American defenses have adapted to counter their new tactics. The cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation, action and reaction, has accelerated to the point where neither side can maintain tactical advantage for more than a single engagement. That evening, Abrams holds another command meeting, shorter than the previous night, but following the same format. He solicits observations from his company commanders, asking what worked and what needs adjustment. The discussion reveals confidence restored. The Americans have proven they can adapt as quickly as the Germans, that tactical flexibility can counter tactical innovation. Captain Leach summarizes the prevailing sentiment: "Sir, they're good. Probably better trained than us in some ways, but we're learning faster than they can adapt, and we've got more resources to work with. I think we can hold." Abrams nods agreement, though privately he wonders how long both sides can sustain this level of combat intensity. Fuel stocks are declining, ammunition reserves are depleting, crew exhaustion is becoming dangerous. The battle has settled into a pattern of thrust and counter-thrust that cannot continue indefinitely. Something will break. The question is, what breaks first? German offensive capability or American defensive endurance? For now, on the evening of September 22nd, 1944, the Americans hold their ground and prepare for the next German attack, confident that their organizational culture of decentralized leadership and rapid adaptation gives them an edge that superior German tanks cannot overcome. September 23rd, 1944, 0600 hours. The Patton has become almost ritualistic. German artillery opens fire at dawn, heavy shells screaming overhead to crash among American positions on the Arracourt Ridge. American counter-battery fire responds within minutes, seeking German gun positions with geometric precision calculated by forward observers and fire direction centers. Then comes the fog, thick as it has been every morning for 5 days, reducing visibility to a few dozen meters and transforming the battlefield into a blind maze where friend and enemy are equally invisible. Into this fog, German armour advances from staging areas in the Forêt de Paroy, probing for weaknesses, seeking opportunities, attempting to achieve the breakthrough that has eluded them since September 19th. American defenders, now thoroughly familiar with German tactics, wait in their hull-down positions and prepared ambush sites, confident in their advantages of terrain and firepower. The engagement that develops this morning follows a pattern established over 4 previous days, but contains unique variations that prevent it from becoming predictable. The Germans attack from the northeast this time, a shift from previous approaches that suggests they are working systematically through possible attack axes. The assault force includes elements of both the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, combined into a composite battle group that brings together the best remaining crews and most operational tanks. Supporting them is a battalion of Panzer Grenadiers riding in half-tracks, infantry who will dismount to clear American defensive positions and enable the panzers to advance. The coordination between armour and infantry is better than in previous attacks, reflecting German tactical doctrine at its finest. American defenders identify the German approach through a combination of methods that would have seemed miraculous to armies of previous wars. Listening posts forward of the main line hear tank engines and radio their observations. Artillery forward observers, positioned in church steeples and other elevated observation posts, spot muzzle flashes through gaps in the fog and calculate firing positions. Electronic intercept teams, monitoring German radio transmissions, identify unit call signs and report German formations and locations. All this information flows to battalion and division fire direction centres, where staff officers plot enemy positions on maps and calculate firing solutions. By 0630, American artillery is engaging German assembly areas with systematic precision, disrupting attack preparations and forcing German commanders to adjust their timing. The fog lifts at 0915, later than previous days, revealing a battlefield already in motion. German panzers have closed to within 400 to 600 metres of American positions, having used the extended fog period to approach closer than in previous engagements. At these ranges, German advantages in armour and gunpowder matter more than American advantages in numbers and positioning. A Panther at 500 metres can penetrate a Sherman from any angle. A Sherman at 500 metres can penetrate a Panther only from the side or rear. The tactical geometry heavily favours the Germans, and for perhaps 30 minutes, the engagement goes badly for American defenders as German tanks methodically destroy Shermans that cannot effectively return fire. Sergeant Thomas Riley, commanding his Sherman in a hull-down position on the Arracourt Ridge, finds himself in exactly the nightmare scenario that tankers fear most, facing a Panther head-on at medium range where his gun is ineffective against its frontal armour. He fires anyway, the 76mm gun recoiling as his gunner sends a round toward the German tank. The tracer arcs across the gap and strikes the Panther's glacis plate, the angled frontal armour, and ricochets skyward in a shower of sparks. No penetration. The Panther's turret traverses toward Riley's position with mechanical precision. Riley has perhaps 3 seconds before the German fires. He drops into the tank, shouting, "Driver, reverse, get us hull down." The Sherman lurches backward, disappearing behind the rise that has provided cover. The German round passes overhead, close enough that Riley hears it crack through the air. The engagement on September 23rd lasts 5 hours, from initial artillery preparation through final German withdrawal at 1400 hours. The fighting is brutal and intimate, conducted at ranges where crew quality and tactical positioning matter more than technological advantages. American defenders call artillery fire on German infantry attempting to advance with the panzers, breaking up combined arms attacks and forcing German tanks to advance without supporting infantry. German tanks respond by engaging American positions with high explosive shells, attempting to suppress defensive fire through volume of fire. Individual actions blur into a continuous thunder of gunfire and explosions that leaves survivors temporarily deafened and permanently traumatized. By mid-afternoon, the German attack has stalled. 15 Panthers and Mark IVs burn in the fields northeast of Arracourt, their crews dead or wounded or retreating on foot toward the forest. American losses are lower but still significant. 9 Shermans destroyed. perhaps 40 casualties among tank crews and supporting infantry. The engagement is typical of what has occurred daily since September 19th. The Germans attack aggressively, achieve limited initial success, then withdraw when ammunition or fuel runs low or casualties become unsustainable. The Americans defend stubbornly, trade space for time when necessary, counterattack when opportunities present themselves, and ultimately hold their positions. Neither side is winning decisively, but the Germans are losing strategically because each engagement depletes their irreplaceable strength, while American losses can be replaced. Claude Patton, the French farmer who retreated to his cellar on September 19th, has now spent 5 days underground with his family. They emerge only after dark to check for damage, gather food from their destroyed kitchen, and use the outdoor latrine. The cellar floor is crowded with neighbours who fled their own homes when German artillery destroyed them. 23 people share a space designed for storing root vegetables and wine, sleeping on the dirt floor, eating preserved food by candlelight, listening to the battle rage overhead. Patton's house has been struck 3 times, the upper floor destroyed, the ground floor damaged but partially habitable. His barn has burned completely, his livestock scattered or dead. His fields, worked by his family for generations, are cratered by shells and scarred by tank tracks. He estimates it will take 5 years to restore his farm if the battle ever ends, 10 years if it continues much longer. The cumulative casualties through September 25th reflect the sustained intensity of combat rare in modern warfare. German losses since September 19th total approximately 130 Panzers and assault guns destroyed or disabled, plus 1,200 casualties among tank crews and supporting infantry. American losses are lower but still substantial. 41 Sherman tanks destroyed, 340 casualties. The kill ratio, roughly 3-1 in American favour, reflects American advantages in terrain, firepower, and logistics. But the ratio also demonstrates German tactical competence. Even fighting from disadvantageous positions with declining resources, German units are extracting significant costs from their opponents. General Balck, monitoring these statistics daily, recognises the unsustainability of current operations. At this loss rate, 5th Panzer Army will lose offensive capability within days. Yet orders from higher headquarters demand continued attacks. The pattern of daily combat establishes rhythms that both armies adapt to with grim professionalism. Mornings bring fog and German attacks, usually beginning between 0600 and 0700 hours. Mid-mornings bring clearing weather and intensive fighting as visibility improves, and both sides can coordinate their actions. Afternoons bring German withdrawals as fuel and ammunition run low and casualties accumulate. Evenings bring resupply operations, casualty evacuation, hasty repairs to damaged vehicles, and planning for the next day's operations. Nights bring scattered skirmishing as patrol actions probe defences and harassment, fire disrupts rest. Sleep becomes a luxury measured in minutes, not hours. Meals are eaten cold from cans. Personal hygiene is abandoned. The men of both armies exist in a state of continuous exhaustion that degrades judgment and increases the likelihood of fatal mistakes. By September 25th, both commanders recognise privately that this battle cannot continue indefinitely. General Balck's staff calculates that fuel stocks provide perhaps 4 more days of offensive operations, ammunition perhaps 6 days, crew endurance perhaps 3 days. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams receives reports that tank maintenance is falling behind, that crew replacements cannot keep pace with casualties, that ammunition expenditure exceeds supply by 20% daily. Both men are experienced enough to recognise the pattern. This is an army approaching culmination point, the moment when offensive capability collapses under accumulated strain. The question is, which army reaches culmination first? For the Germans, already fighting with inadequate resources against an enemy with superior logistics, the answer seems obvious. Yet Balck has spent his career achieving victories in impossible situations, and he is not yet prepared to concede defeat. He has one more card to play, one final offensive, using his remaining strength in a single concentrated blow. If it succeeds, he might achieve strategic objectives that have eluded him for a week. If it fails, 5th Panzer Army will lose offensive capability completely. On the evening of September 25th, Balck issues orders for that final attack. Scheduled for September 27th, knowing it represents his last chance to turn tactical stalemate into strategic success. September 26, 1944, 2200 hours. General Hermann Balck stands alone in his command post, a farmhouse cellar lit by kerosene lamps, and studies the map table that has dominated his thoughts for 8 days, pins marking German units cluster in the Forêt de Paroy, color-coded by unit type and combat strength. Blue pins represent American positions arrayed along the Arracourt Ridge and surrounding villages. Red lines trace attack routes attempted over the previous week, each line ending in a cluster of black pins representing destroyed tanks. The map tells a story of persistent failure despite tactical competence, of an army trying everything possible within its means and achieving nothing decisive. In his career spanning 3 decades, Balck has commanded in desperate situations before, but this battle feels different. He is not being defeated by superior enemy tactics or unexpected complications. He is being defeated by arithmetic. The orders that arrived from Army Group G headquarters 2 hours ago demand what Balck knows is impossible. Arracourt must be taken within 48 hours to prevent American advance toward the German border. All available reserves are released to 5th Panzer Army for this purpose. Failure is unacceptable. The directive comes from Hitler personally, routed through multiple command levels, but bearing the unmistakable tone of the Führer's obsessive micromanagement. Balck has received similar orders throughout his career, demands that military forces achieve objectives beyond their capability, accompanied by implications that failure reflects insufficient will rather than inadequate means. He knows better than to argue or explain why the orders cannot be executed as written. Instead, he plans how to make the best attempt possible with forces that are shadows of their former strength. His staff has calculated that 5th Panzer Army currently possesses 75 operational tanks, down from 262 on September 19th. Additionally, approximately 30 damaged tanks might be returned to service within 24 hours, if repair facilities can obtain necessary parts and mechanics work through the night. This represents the total armoured strength available for the final offensive. Supporting units are similarly depleted. Infantry battalions operating at 40 to 50% strength. Artillery battalions rationing ammunition. Engineer companies exhausted from continuous operations. Fuel stocks provide perhaps 2 more days of offensive operations, 3 at most if consumption's carefully managed. The picture is bleak but not hopeless. 75 tanks, properly employed with adequate support, might still achieve a breakthrough if American defences have weakened proportionally. Balck's intelligence officers brief him on American dispositions, information gathered through aerial reconnaissance, signals intercept, and prisoner interrogation. The 4th Armoured Division has received reinforcements. Combat Command B arrived 3 days ago with approximately 60 fresh Sherman tanks, replacing American losses and adding to defensive strength. American defensive positions have been reinforced and improved, with additional minefields, obstacles, and prepared artillery concentrations. American morale appears high despite continuous combat. Most troublingly, American fuel and ammunition supplies appear adequate, suggesting their logistics have caught up after the shortages that initially paused Patton's advance. The intelligence assessment concludes that American defensive capability has increased, even as German offensive capability has declined. The force ratio, already unfavourable on September 19th, has become catastrophic. Yet Balck has spent his career finding ways to achieve tactical success despite unfavourable odds. His plan for September 27th represents his most sophisticated attempt yet, incorporating lessons from every previous engagement. The attack will be concentrated, not dispersed, all 75 operational tanks committed in a single sector rather than spread across multiple axes. The attack will be supported by every available artillery piece, firing a systematic preparatory bombardment to suppress American defences. The attack will be timed for 0500 hours, early enough that fog might provide concealment, but late enough that German forces can navigate to their assault positions in darkness. Most critically, the attack will be followed immediately by exploitation forces, ready to rush through any breakthrough and capture Arracourt village before American reserves can respond. On the morning of September 27th, 0500 hours, the final German offensive begins with an artillery barrage, more intensive than any previous bombardment. Every gun in 5th Panzer Army, supplemented by corps artillery and some divisional guns borrowed from adjacent sectors, fires a systematic program calculated to saturate American defensive positions with high explosive. The bombardment lasts 30 minutes, expending ammunition stockpiled carefully over the previous week. When the guns fall silent at 0530, German armour advances from the Forêt de Paroy in a concentrated formation that represents the last offensive capability of Hitler's forces in Lorraine. Panthers and Mark IVs, many showing damage from previous engagements, roll westward through the pre-dawn darkness, with crews who understand this is their final attack, that success or failure here will determine the battle's outcome. The German attack achieves initial surprise despite American expectations of continued offensive action. The artillery barrage, heavier than previous bombardments, forces many American tank crews to seek shelter, delaying their response to the armoured assault that follows. German tanks, advancing in tight formation with excellent fire discipline, penetrate American forward positions in the sector northeast of Arracourt, where defences were assessed as weakest. Within 30 minutes, German armour has advanced nearly a kilometre into American defensive depth, overrunning several outposts and disrupting communications. The breakthrough appears imminent as Panzer grenadiers following the tanks begin clearing trenches and prepared positions. For a brief window from 0600 to 0700 hours, German forces achieve exactly what Balck envisioned: a concentrated penetration threatening to unravel American defences. Then fog lifts at 0900 hours, and American firepower descends with terrible efficiency. Artillery forward observers, having waited through the morning darkness for sufficient visibility to adjust fire, now call in concentrated bombardments on German forces caught in the open between their starting positions and their objectives. American tanks that withdrew during the initial German assault now return, firing into German flanks from positions the attackers cannot effectively engage. Most devastatingly, American fighter-bombers appear overhead for the first time in 3 days, the weather having finally cleared sufficiently for air operations. P-47 Thunderbolts dive through scattered anti-aircraft fire to attack German armour with rockets and bombs, transforming the battlefield into an inferno of exploding vehicles and detonating ammunition. Sergeant Thomas Riley, commanding his Sherman from a position northwest of the German breakthrough, watches as the battle turns decisively in American favour. His platoon had withdrawn during the initial German assault, trading space for survival, but now reoccupies positions that provide flanking fire into the German salient. Through his commander's periscope, Riley sees German tanks attempting to withdraw, their formation dissolving as individual vehicles seek escape routes. He identifies a Panther at approximately 800 metres, its side armour exposed as it turns to retreat. Gunner, target tank, 10 o'clock, 800. His gunner acquires the target smoothly. Identified. Riley waits for the optimal moment when the Panther is in profile and stationary. Fire. The 76mm round strikes the Panther's side armour and penetrates. The German tank, shuddering to a halt as flames erupt from its engine compartment. Target destroyed. Next target, 11 o'clock, 900 metres. By 1400 hours, the German offensive has collapsed completely. 29 panzers burn in the fields northeast of Arracourt, their crews dead or captured or fleeing on foot toward the forest. German infantry caught in the open when the attack stalled, surrendering groups or attempt to escape under cover of smoke from burning vehicles. The exploitation force that was supposed to rush through the breakthrough never commits, held in reserve when commanders recognize that no breakthrough has been achieved. American losses are significant but sustainable. 7 Shermans destroyed, approximately 40 casualties. The kill ratio, more than 4-1 in American favor, reflects the advantages that compound when defenders occupy prepared positions with superior firepower and air support. In his command post, General Balck receives reports of the disaster with the controlled emotion of a professional who has experienced failure before and will not allow it to cloud his judgment. He listens as his staff officers describe the sequence of events: initial success, fog lifting, concentrated American counterfire, air attacks, disintegration. When the final casualty reports arrive, Balck studies them in silence. 5th Panzer Army now possesses approximately 26 operational tanks, less than 10% of its starting strength 9 days ago. Infantry units report strengths of 30 to 40%. Artillery ammunition is nearly exhausted. Fuel stocks provide perhaps one more day of limited operations. The army has lost offensive capability completely. Any further attacks would be gestures, not serious military operations. At 1600 hours, Balck composes a message to Army Group G headquarters requesting permission to withdraw to defensive positions 15 kilometers east of Arracourt. The message is carefully worded, emphasizing that continued offensive operations are impossible given current force strength, that defensive operations offer the only chance to preserve remaining combat power, that further attacks will simply destroy 5th Panzer Army without achieving strategic objectives. He transmits the message, knowing it will likely be rejected, that Hitler tolerates retreat only when absolutely unavoidable, that his request will be interpreted as defeatism rather than military realism. 2 hours later, the response arrives. Request denied. Hold current positions. Prepare to resume offensive operations when reinforcements arrive. Balck reads the message once, then sets it aside and turns to his staff. Gentlemen, we withdraw tonight regardless. If they want to court-martial me, I will be available after we've saved what's left of this army. The withdrawal order goes out immediately and German forces begin the long retreat eastward. Abandoning equipment, they lack fuel to move, leaving behind the burned hulks of nearly 240 tanks that mark 1 week of failed offensives. The Battle of Arracourt, though fighting will continue sporadically for several more days, is effectively over. September 25th, 1944, 1300 hours. Captain James Mitchell, piloting a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber with the call sign Ramrod 23, breaks through a layer of clouds at 8,000 feet and sees below him the most target-rich environment he has encountered in 6 months of combat flying. The weather, which has prevented air operations for 4 consecutive days, has finally cleared enough for his squadron to launch ground attack missions. Below him, the landscape around Arracourt resolves with the clarity of a military map. The village itself, the forested areas to the east where intelligence reports German armor concentrating, the farmland scarred by shell craters and tank tracks. And movement. Vehicles moving across open ground, dozens of them, their shapes unmistakable, even from altitude. German tanks. Mitchell keys his radio, alerting his flight leader and wingmen to the targets below. Ramrod leader, this is 2-3. Multiple tanks in the open, grid coordinates. He reels off the location, simultaneously pushing his stick forward to begin a diving attack. The Thunderbolt responds instantly, its massive Pratt & Whitney radial engine pulling the aircraft into a steep descent that pins Mitchell against his seat. His airspeed increases rapidly, 250 knots, 300, 350. Through his gun sight, a German tank grows larger, details becoming visible. Mitchell selects rockets, checks that his armament switch is alive, and continues his dive. At 3,000 feet, he pickles his first pair of 5-inch rockets. The rockets ignite with brilliant flashes, streaking ahead of his aircraft toward the target below. The development of effective tactical air support for ground forces has taken the Allied Air Forces 3 years of trial and error to achieve. Early in the war, air-ground cooperation was haphazard at best. Bombers attacked pre-planned targets, regardless of changing ground situations. Fighters strafed based on pilot initiative, with minimal coordination, and communication between aircraft and ground units was nearly non-existent. By September 1944, the system has evolved into something approaching efficiency. Forward air controllers, specially trained officers embedded with ground units, maintain direct radio communication with aircraft overhead. These controllers can observe enemy movements, identify targets, and vector fighter bombers to precise locations within minutes. The innovation, seemingly simple, has transformed tactical aviation from a separate activity conducted parallel to ground operations into an integrated component of combined arms warfare. The P-47 Thunderbolt, affectionately nicknamed Jug by crews who appreciate its rugged durability, exemplifies the American approach to tactical aviation. It is large and heavy by fighter standards, weighing 7 tons empty and nearly 9 tons loaded for combat. Its 2,000 horsepower engine provides adequate speed but exceptional durability, allowing the aircraft to absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter fighters. Its armament is devastating. 8 50 caliber machine guns, each loaded with 400 rounds, plus underwing stations that can carry bombs, rockets, or napalm. A single P-47 on a ground attack mission can deliver more ordnance than a World War I artillery battery. A squadron of 16 Thunderbolts can devastate an entire tank battalion in minutes. Captain Mitchell pulls out of his dive at 1,000 feet, simultaneously watching his rockets impact near the German tank. and checking his surroundings for anti-aircraft fire. The rockets explode in brilliant flashes, one striking the tank directly and the other impacting just beyond it. The tank stops moving, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. Mitchell banks hard right, setting up for another attack run when tracer fire arcs past his canopy. German anti-aircraft guns, positioned to protect their armor, engage with automatic weapons that lace the sky with glowing projectiles. Mitchell jinks left, then right, spoiling the gunner's aim, while simultaneously calling out the anti-aircraft position to his flight. Ramrod flight, flak at grid 873245, Watcher 6. The air attack on German positions around Arracourt on September 25th represents the first significant tactical air operation in the battle area since September 19th. Weather has grounded most aircraft for 5 days, limiting air support to occasional reconnaissance flights that provided intelligence but no direct fire support. The clearing weather allows 9th Air Force to launch maximum effort missions, more than 100 P-47 sorties over the Arracourt sector in 6 hours, each aircraft making multiple attack runs before returning to base to rearm and refuel. The fighter bombers attack German armor, supply vehicles, artillery positions, and any target identified by forward air controllers as threatening American ground forces. The cumulative effect is devastating beyond what ammunition expenditure might suggest. Lieutenant Hans Weber, commanding a Panther tank that survived the morning engagement on September 25th, experiences the air attack from the receiving end and gains new understanding of his predicament. His tank sits in a woodlot northeast of Arracourt, hidden under camouflage netting, its crew resting after 6 hours of combat. Weber hears aircraft engines, distant at first but rapidly growing louder. He climbs out of his tank and scans the sky, spotting 4 P-47 seconds diving toward his position. There is no time to start the engine and move, no time to do anything except scramble for cover. Weber throws himself into a drainage ditch 10 meters from his tank as the first P-47 opens fire. 8 50-caliber machine guns converge on the woodlot, shredding trees and filling the air with flying debris. Rockets follow, impacting with thunderous explosions that shake the ground. Weber presses himself into the mud, hands over his head, utterly helpless. When the attack ends and the aircraft depart, Weber emerges to find his Panther burning, struck by at least one rocket that penetrated the thinner roof armor and detonated inside. 3 other tanks in his company are also burning. His crew, sheltering in the same ditch, survived uninjured but are in shock. Weber's radio operator, a veteran who has fought since 1941 on both the eastern and western fronts, sits on the ground, staring at nothing, and speaks the thought they all share. How do we fight this? We can't see them until they're already attacking. We can't hide from them. We can't shoot back effectively. They can kill us anytime they want. Weber has no answer because there is no answer. The Luftwaffe, which once dominated European skies, is now almost entirely absent. German anti-aircraft guns are too few and poorly positioned. German tanks, deadly against ground targets, are nearly helpless against air attack. The statistics for air operations on September 25th through September 29th, when weather permits sustained fighter-bomber activity, demonstrate air power's impact on armoured warfare. Over 5 days, 9th Air Force flies 467 sorties over the Arracourt sector, expending thousands of rounds of ammunition, hundreds of rockets, and tons of bombs. Post-battle assessment credits air attacks with destroying or damaging approximately 250 German vehicles, tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and half-tracks. Some of these assessments are undoubtedly optimistic. Pilots frequently overestimate damage inflicted during rapid attack runs, but even conservative estimates suggest that tactical air power destroyed more German vehicles than ground combat during the same period. Air power's psychological impact exceeds even its material destruction. German forces become reluctant to move during daylight, knowing that any movement attracts immediate air attack. The integration of air and ground operations at Arracourt represents doctrine developed through painful experience in North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy. Forward air controllers, officers specifically trained to coordinate air support, position themselves with frontline units, and maintain radio contact with aircraft. When ground commanders identify targets requiring air attack, requests flow through this network to aircraft already airborne and orbiting in cab rank positions, ready to respond within 15 minutes. The system works because it is simple, because radio communication is reliable, and because pilots and ground officers trust each other to provide accurate information. German forces attempting similar coordination struggle with inadequate radios, shortage of aircraft, and lack of training in combined operations. On September 27th, during the final German offensive, tactical air power delivers its most decisive intervention. Fighter bombers attack German armor caught in the open when fog lifts, transforming a tactical stalemate into a catastrophic defeat. Captain Mitchell, flying his third sortie of the day, describes the scene in his post-flight report. Enemy tanks concentrated in approximately 2 square kilometers, attempting to withdraw toward the forest. Our flight made 5 attack runs, expending all ordnance. Multiple tanks observed burning, many vehicles abandoned. Enemy appeared confused and disorganized, making excellent targets. The clinical language masks the horror of the attack from the German perspective. Tanks exploding, crews burning, survivors running across open ground while machine guns strafe them from above. It is mechanized warfare at its most brutal, technology destroying men and machines with industrial efficiency. By September 29th, German forces remaining near Arracourt have adapted their tactics in recognition of air power's dominance. They move only at night or in fog. They disperse vehicles widely rather than concentrating. They position anti-aircraft guns prominently, hoping to deter attacks even though ammunition shortages limit sustained fire. They camouflage everything meticulously, knowing that concealment is their only defense. These adaptations reduce casualties but also reduce operational effectiveness. An army that can move only in darkness or fog, that must disperse its strength to avoid air attack, that spends more effort on concealment than maneuver, has lost offensive capability. The Battle of Arracourt demonstrates what military theorists have predicted, but previous battles have not definitively proven. Tactical air power, properly integrated with ground forces, can defeat armoured formations regardless of technological superiority in tanks. The lesson will shape military doctrine for decades, leading to increased emphasis on air defence systems and integrated air-ground operations. But for the German forces at Arracourt in September 1944, the lesson comes too late and at too high a cost. They face an enemy who controls the skies absolutely, and that control makes their tank superiority irrelevant. September 29th, 1944, 0400 hours. In a cellar headquarters 5 kilometers east of Arracourt, a German fuel officer presents General Hermann Balck with calculations that confirm what both men already know. 5th Panzer Army has approximately 48 hours of fuel remaining at current consumption rates. Offensive operations are impossible, defensive operations are marginally sustainable, retreat, if ordered, must begin immediately or risk abandoning vehicles that cannot be moved. Balck listens to the briefing with the expression of a man who has heard similar reports too many times to react emotionally. He dismisses the fuel officer with instructions to prepare detailed fuel distribution plans for withdrawal operations, then sits alone studying maps by lamplight. The time has come to acknowledge what he has known since September 27th. The battle is lost, the offensive has failed, continued operations will only destroy what remains of his command. The decision to withdraw requires no debate or soul-searching. Balck's military judgment, honed through decades of experience, tells him clearly that further attacks with 26 operational tanks against an enemy with 130 tanks supported by total air supremacy would be suicide, not warfare. His orders demand continued offensive operations, but orders written by staffs hundreds of kilometers from the battlefield cannot change battlefield reality. The only question is whether to request permission for withdrawal, knowing permission will likely be denied, or simply order withdrawal and accept the consequences. Balck chooses the latter. History, he reflects, may judge him a coward or a traitor for abandoning Hitler's offensive without authorization. He can live with that judgment more easily than he could live with responsibility for destroying his army in attacks he knows will fail. At 0600 hours, elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade attempt what will be their final attack of the battle. 18 operational tanks, perhaps a quarter of the brigade's starting strength, advance toward American positions northeast of Arracourt in a dawn assault that follows the same pattern as every previous attack. Movement in darkness, approach to assault positions, attack at first light. American defenders, thoroughly familiar with German tactics after 11 days of combat, respond with practiced efficiency. Artillery fire saturates probable German assembly areas. Tank destroyers positioned in roving reserve intercept the German advance. Sherman tanks in hull-down positions engage at ranges where American numerical superiority compensates for German technological advantages. The engagement lasts 45 minutes. By 0645, the German attack has failed. 11 of 18 attacking tanks are destroyed or disabled. The remaining 7 withdraw in disorder, several abandoning the field when mechanical failures or fuel exhaustion makes further movement impossible. American losses total 3 Shermans damaged, none destroyed. The kill ratio approaches 4-1, consistent with the overall battle pattern. But numbers alone fail to capture the psychological dimension of this final engagement. German crews, exhausted after 11 days of continuous combat and demoralized by endless defeats, lack the aggressive spirit that characterized earlier attacks. Several tanks withdraw at the first sign of serious resistance, others fire a few rounds before retreating. The attack feels like a formality, something attempted because orders demanded it, but executed without conviction that success is possible. At 10 to 100 hours, the weather clears completely for the first time in 3 days. American fighter bombers, grounded by fog and low clouds during the morning engagement, now arrive over the battlefield in force. They find German vehicles attempting to retreat toward the Forêt de Paroy, moving in daylight out of desperation rather than choice. The aircraft attack with devastating efficiency, destroying 14 tanks and 23 other vehicles in the space of 2 hours. German survivors abandon vehicles that are still operational, fleeing on foot into the forest rather than remaining with tanks that have become death traps. The spectacle is pitiful and terrible. Soldiers who have fought with skill and courage for nearly 2 weeks, running from their positions in panic, leaving behind equipment they can no longer defend or operate. At 1400 hours, American patrols, advancing cautiously from Arracourt encounter, abandoned German vehicles scattered across the landscape. A Sherman company moving northeast finds 4 Panthers sitting beside a road, their crews gone, fuel tanks empty. Infantry clearing the Forêt de Paroy discover supply dumps abandoned intact, ammunition stacked in crates, fuel drums punctured to prevent American use, engineering equipment, artillery pieces, trucks, half-tracks, all the machinery of modern warfare litter the forest and surrounding fields, mute testimony to an army in full retreat. American intelligence officers, examining captured documents and interrogating prisoners, piece together the story. 5th Panzer Army has withdrawn to defensive positions 15 kilometers east, abandoning 86 vehicles it lacked fuel to move. The final accounting of the Battle of Arracourt requires weeks of careful documentation as intelligence officers count destroyed vehicles, compile casualty reports, and analyze after-action assessments. German losses are catastrophic by any measure. 236 tanks and assault guns destroyed or abandoned, representing 90% of 5th Panzer Army's starting armoured strength. Infantry casualties approach 3,000 killed, wounded, and missing. Artillery losses include 42 guns destroyed or captured. Truck and vehicle losses exceed 400. The army that attacked with such confidence on September 19th has been effectively destroyed as an offensive force, reduced to defending remnants without capacity for major operations. American losses, though significant in absolute terms, are sustainable given the logistical and industrial base supporting them. 55 Sherman tanks were destroyed during the battle, of which 41 were recovered and returned to service after repair. Total American casualties number 340 killed, wounded, and missing across all units involved. Artillery ammunition expenditure exceeded 50,000 rounds, quickly replenished from supply depots that have caught up after the fuel crisis that initially paused Third Army's advance. Equipment losses are negligible except for tanks, a few dozen trucks, some artillery pieces, various small equipment. Within 2 weeks, 4th Armoured Division will have replaced all losses and be ready for further operations. The battlefield silence on the evening of September 29th carries a quality different from previous evenings. For 11 consecutive nights, the darkness brought artillery exchanges, patrol actions, and the rumble of tanks moving to new positions. Tonight brings only wind through destroyed villages and the crackle of fires burning in the hulks of destroyed vehicles. American tankers sit on their Shermans and smoke cigarettes, talking quietly, still processing the realization that the battle is over. Some clean their weapons meticulously, the ritual of maintenance providing comfort after the chaos of combat. Others write letters home, trying to describe experiences that resist description. A few sleep, the exhausted sleep of men who have survived what they were not certain they would survive. Sergeant Thomas Riley walks across the battlefield as evening fades into night, moving among destroyed German tanks with a flashlight that illuminates twisted metal and charred interiors. He is not looting the military police would arrest him, but simply looking, trying to understand what happened here. A Panther sits with its turret blown completely off by ammunition detonation, the violence of the explosion evident in bent armor plates and scattered debris. A Mark IV has burned so thoroughly that the interior is empty except for melted metal pooled in the hull bottom. Riley finds a German tanker's notebook lying in the mud beside a destroyed vehicle, its pages water-damaged but partially readable. The last entry, dated September 27th, says simply, "I don't think we're going home." Riley pockets the notebook, not as a souvenir, but as evidence of a truth he already knows. The men in these destroyed tanks were soldiers like himself, trying to survive, failing through no fault of their own. In the cellars of Arracourt village, French civilians emerge cautiously as darkness falls, checking whether the guns have finally stopped for good or merely paused as they have done so many times before. Claude Patton, the farmer who has spent 11 days underground with his family, climbs the cellar stairs and emerges into his destroyed home. The upper floor is gone completely, collapsed into rubble. The ground floor is damaged but standing. His barn has burned. His fields are moonscapes of craters and tank tracks. But he is alive, his family is alive, and the battle appears to be over. He stands in the ruins of his home and watches American tanks silhouetted against the sunset, their crews relaxing for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Tomorrow, he will begin the work of rebuilding. Tonight, he allows himself to simply survive. October 1st, 1944. Captain Richard Harrison, commanding a Graves registration company, stands at the edge of the Arracourt battlefield and surveys terrain that will occupy his unit for weeks. His mission is among the least glamorous and most necessary in modern warfare, recovering bodies, identifying the dead, and ensuring proper burial for those who fell. The battlefield sprawls across 15 square kilometers of farmland, forest, and villages, every meter scarred by combat. Shell craters pock the ground at irregular intervals. Tank tracks have churned fields into muddy moonscapes. Destroyed vehicles sit at scattered intervals, some still smoking 3 days after the battle ended. Harrison estimates his company will recover between 200 and 300 bodies, perhaps half German and half a combination of American and French civilian casualties. The work begins methodically, teams of soldiers moving across the battlefield in organized search patterns. They locate bodies by sight, by smell, and sometimes by information from local civilians who know where fighting was heaviest. Each body receives careful documentation, location found, identifying marks or documents, unit insignia if discernible, condition. American dead are photographed, fingerprinted when possible, and prepared for burial in American military cemeteries. German dead receive similar respect, gathered for burial in designated German cemeteries per Geneva Convention requirements. The work is grim and physically demanding, made worse by September's unseasonable warmth that has accelerated decomposition. Soldiers rotate through the duty in shifts, no one working more than 4 hours before being relieved. The count of destroyed vehicles exceeds even the most pessimistic intelligence estimates. Teams of ordnance specialists moving across the battlefield document 281 German armoured vehicles, tanks, assault guns, self-propelled artillery, armoured cars. Some are destroyed beyond recognition, burned so thoroughly that only running gear and automotive components remain identifiable. Others show relatively minor damage, disabled by mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion rather than enemy fire. A Panther sitting beside a road appears undamaged until inspection reveals its transmission has failed, the chronic weakness that plagued German heavy tanks throughout the war. Several Panthers and Mark IVs were simply abandoned when their crews ran out of fuel, left beside roads with hatches open and personal equipment scattered nearby. American salvage operations begin immediately, priorities determined by practical considerations of value and repairability. Of 55 Shermans destroyed during the battle, 41 are recoverable with varying degrees of repair work required. Recovery vehicles tow damaged tanks to field maintenance facilities where mechanics assess damage and begin repairs. Some tanks need only minor work, replacement of damaged road wheels, repair of track, minor engine maintenance. These vehicles return to service within days. Others require extensive rebuilding, new transmissions, replacement turrets, complete engine overhauls. These repairs take weeks, but are still faster and cheaper than building new tanks. 14 Shermans are assessed as total losses, too severely damaged to justify repair effort. These hulks will be cannibalized for spare parts or scrapped. The villages caught in the battle zone present different challenges entirely. Arracourt, which sat at the center of the fighting, has sustained damage to approximately 60% of its buildings. The village church, used as an observation post by American artillery spotters, took direct hits from German counter-battery fire and collapsed completely. The town hall is a burned shell. Houses that stood for centuries are now piles of rubble. French authorities estimate that restoring Arracourt to habitable condition will require 6 months of intensive reconstruction and considerable material investment. Rechicourt, site of particularly heavy fighting on September 22nd, sustained even worse damage, with 80% of structures destroyed or severely damaged. The French government, impoverished by 4 years of occupation and barely functioning, has limited resources to assist reconstruction. Civilian casualties, though lower than might be expected given the battle's intensity, still represent tragedy for small communities. 89 civilians were killed during the 11 days of combat, most by artillery, fire, or bombing that struck homes and cellars where families sheltered. 200 more suffered injuries ranging from minor to severe. Some deaths result from direct military action, shells striking occupied buildings, tanks crushing homes where people were trapped. Others result from secondary effects: smoke inhalation from fires, structural collapse, lack of medical care for treatable conditions. The French Red Cross establishes a field hospital in Nancy to treat civilian casualties, but many injured suffer permanent disabilities due to delayed treatment or inadequate medical resources. The problem of unexploded ordnance complicates both military operations and civilian reconstruction. Combat consumed enormous quantities of ammunition. American forces fired approximately 50,000 artillery shells, Germans perhaps half that number. Not all ordnance detonates on impact. Artillery shells sometimes burrow into soft ground without exploding. Bombs drop from aircraft with faulty fuses. Mortar rounds land in mud that cushions impact and prevents detonation. French authorities, working with American engineers, estimate that approximately 2,400 pieces of unexploded ordnance litter the battlefield and surrounding areas. Clearing this ordnance will require systematic surveys conducted by explosive ordnance disposal specialists, dangerous work that continues through 1946. The environmental damage to Lorraine farmland shocks agricultural experts who survey the area after combat ends. Tank tracks, typically 8 to 16 inches wide and exerting tremendous ground pressure, compress soil and destroy drainage patterns. Areas that saw heavy tank traffic have been churned into moonscapes where normal farming equipment cannot operate. Shell craters, numbering in the thousands, interrupt field patterns and create drainage problems. Some agricultural land will require complete regrading and soil rehabilitation before crops can be planted. Experts estimate that restoring battlefield areas to full agricultural productivity will take 5 to 10 years, even with intensive effort. Some areas, particularly those contaminated with fuel and lubricants from destroyed vehicles, may require decades to recover fully. Ernie Pyle, the legendary war correspondent, visits Arracourt in early October and files a dispatch that attempts to convey the battlefield's impact. I have walked battlefields from North Africa to France, seen the detritus of combat from Kasserine Pass to the hedgerows of Normandy, but Arracourt is something else entirely. The sheer concentration of destruction, the density of burned vehicles and cratered ground, suggests an intensity of combat that is difficult to comprehend. This was not a battle that swept across terrain, leaving scattered evidence. This was two armies locked in place for 11 days, pounding each other with every weapon available, transforming peaceful farmland into industrial slaughterhouse. The cleanup will take months. The memories will last forever. By mid-October, the battlefield has been largely cleared of immediate hazards. Bodies have been recovered and buried. Destroyed vehicles have been removed or pushed into ditches. Unexploded ordnance in main traffic areas has been cleared or marked. Villages begin reconstruction, Though the work proceeds slowly, given limited resources and competing priorities, farmers return to fields where fighting occurred, beginning the long process of restoration. The Battle of Arracourt fades from immediate military attention as focus shifts to continuing operations toward Germany. But for the people of Lorraine, for the soldiers who fought there, for the families of men who died there, Arracourt remains an open wound that will take years to heal and decades to understand. The battlefield falls silent, but the silence carries weight of memory, sacrifice, and loss that numbers alone cannot capture. October 3rd, 1944, General George S. Patton Jr., commander of 3rd Army, arrives at 4th Armored Division headquarters near Arracourt in a motorcade that includes 3 jeeps, 2 command cars, and enough military police to secure a small city. His visit has been hastily arranged, announced only 24 hours in advance, typical of Patton's command style that emphasizes personal presence and direct observation. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, still wearing the uniform he slept in after 72 continuous hours of operations, waits at the division command post with his battalion staff, uncertain what to expect. Patton emerges from his command car wearing immaculate uniform and gleaming helmet, surveys the assembled officers with the expression of a man inspecting property he owns, then breaks into a broad smile. "Gentlemen," he announces, his voice carrying the precise diction of a man who studied public speaking extensively, "you have just won the greatest tank battle fought by American forces in this war." The awards ceremony that follows is pure theatre, Patton at his most performative. He assembles the division in a field beside the headquarters, hundreds of soldiers in formation while their general pins medals and makes brief remarks about courage and excellence. 2 distinguished service crosses go to tank commanders who destroyed multiple German vehicles at close range. 37 silver stars recognize various acts of valor during the 11-day battle. 127 bronze stars honor soldiers whose specific actions merit recognition. Abrams receives a promotion to full colonel and command of Combat Command B, a jump in responsibility that reflects Patton's assessment of his tactical performance. The ceremony takes 90 minutes, every minute carefully staged to maximize impact on morale and unit cohesion. After the formal ceremony, Patton meets privately with Abrams and select staff officers in a farmhouse that serves as division headquarters. The mood shifts immediately from public performance to professional assessment. Patton spreads maps on a table and listens as Abrams briefs him on the battle. German tactics, American responses, key engagements, lessons learned. Patton interrupts occasionally with questions that demonstrate he has studied preliminary reports carefully and wants clarification on specific points. This engagement on September 27th, he asks, tapping the map, "The Germans concentrated their remaining armour in single attack. Why did it fail?" Abrams explains the combination of factors: American reinforcements arriving just before the attack, effective use of roving tank destroyer reserves, artillery concentration, and ultimately air power intervention when weather cleared. Patton nods slowly. Combined arms, that's the lesson here. Combined arms properly executed defeats technological superiority every time. The strategic implications of Arracourt occupy much of the private discussion. Patton understands that this battle vindicated his aggressive strategy of rapid advance despite logistical constraints. The Germans, forced to commit their last substantial armoured reserve in the west to stop Third Army, have suffered catastrophic losses without achieving any strategic objectives. The road to Germany remains open once fuel supplies permit resumption of offensive operations. More importantly, Arracourt has demonstrated that American armoured divisions, properly employed, can defeat German Panzer forces even when outnumbered in individual tank quality. The battle proves that mobility, numerical superiority, and combined arms coordination compensate for disadvantages in armour, protection, and gunpowder. Yet Patton is careful not to overstate American tactical superiority or underestimate the German achievement. "Make no mistake," he tells his assembled officers, "we fought a damned good enemy here. Balck is one of the best generals Germany has, and he very nearly pulled this off, despite impossible odds. If their logistics had been adequate, if they'd had air support, if we hadn't held this ridge," he leaves the thought incomplete. But everyone understands the implication. The battle was won through advantages in terrain, resources, and air power, as much as through superior tactics. American forces fought well, but they fought from positions of strength against an enemy operating under crippling constraints. The question of tank quality provokes extended discussion, with Patton expressing opinions that will influence American armored doctrine for the remainder of the war. "I'm tired of hearing complaints about the Sherman," he states flatly. "Yes, the Panther has a better gun and heavier armor. So what? We have 5 Shermans for every Panther, and ours actually run when we need them to. The boys here just destroyed 200 German tanks while losing 50 of ours. That's not because our tanks are bad. That's because our tactics are good, our logistics work, and our soldiers know how to fight." He acknowledges that improvements are welcome. The 76mm gun is better than the 75mm. Better armor would save lives, but insists that obsessing over individual tank quality misses the point of mechanized warfare. The lessons learned discussion generates a detailed memo that Patton orders distributed to all armored divisions in 3rd Army. Key points include the importance of terrain selection for defensive operations, the value of roving reserve forces to counter penetrations, the necessity of integrating artillery and tank operations, and the critical role of tactical air support. The memo emphasizes aggressive counterattack as the response to enemy penetration, rather than passive defense. It notes that hull-down positions enabled Sherman tanks to engage Panthers effectively at ranges where American guns could penetrate German armor. It highlights the importance of combined arms teams rather than pure tank formations. The document becomes required reading at armor schools and influences tactical training throughout the European theatre. Bradley visits Arracourt a week after Patton, conducting his own assessment of the battle for higher headquarters. His conclusions largely mirror Patton's, but emphasize different aspects. Bradley notes the logistical dimension, the fact that both armies fought under severe fuel and ammunition constraints that limited operations. He calculates that adequate German logistics would have extended the battle indefinitely, potentially resulting in American defeat despite tactical advantages. Bradley's report recommends continued prioritization of fuel allocation to 1st Army, arguing that reaching the Rhine quickly matters more than Patton's operations in Lorraine. The recommendation frustrates Patton, who believes Arracourt proved 3rd Army deserves priority, but Bradley's strategic logic prevails at SHIAF headquarters. On October 10th, the first training bulletins incorporating Arracourt lessons begin circulating to American armored units throughout Europe and even reaching training bases in the United States. The bulletins include tactical diagrams, after-action reports, and specific recommendations based on 4th Armored Division's experience. Armor schools add Arracourt scenarios to their training curriculum. Tank commanders study engagement reports to understand how American crews defeated technologically superior German tanks. The battle becomes a case study in combined arms warfare, demonstrating principles that will guide American armored doctrine through the remainder of World War II and beyond. For the officers and soldiers of 4th Armored Division, Patton's visit and the subsequent recognition represent validation of sacrifices made during 11 days of continuous combat. They have fought the battle their training prepared them for, adapted to German tactics more sophisticated than they expected, and prevailed despite individual disadvantages in equipment. The experience has forged unit cohesion and confidence that will sustain them through coming operations. They understand that they have been tested in ways few American units have experienced and have proven themselves equal to the challenge. The battle's immediate impact fades as they prepare for further advances toward Germany, but its memory remains a shared experience that binds survivors together and defines their identity as soldiers who fought at Arracourt. May 8th, 1945. General Hermann Balck, recently captured by American forces advancing through southern Germany, sits in a temporary detention facility and waits for the interrogation he knows is coming. The war has ended officially today, Nazi Germany surrendering unconditionally after 12 years of rule that promised a 1,000-year Reich. Balck feels no particular emotion about the collapse. He saw it coming years ago, recognized the strategic impossibility of Germany's position, understood that tactical excellence could delay but not prevent ultimate defeat. Now comes the accounting, the process of examining what happened and why. He expects harsh treatment, possibly war crimes, accusations given his rank and responsibility. Instead, the American officer who enters the room introduces himself as a historian, not a prosecutor, and asks if Balck would be willing to discuss the Battle of Arracourt. The interrogation extends over several sessions in May and June 1945, conducted by officers from the U.S. Army's historical section who recognize that Balck possesses insights into armored warfare that should be captured while memory is fresh. Balck speaks freely, his English adequate for technical discussion, occasionally lapsing into German when searching for precise terminology. He describes the constraints under which 5th Panzer Army operated, the impossible orders from higher headquarters, the progressive degradation of German combat power over 11 days of fighting. His analysis is clinical, stripped of emotion or self-justification, the assessment of a professional examining operational failures, with the detachment of a surgeon studying a failed procedure. When asked why the Arracourt offensive failed, Balk's response is immediate and unequivocal: logistics. We lost the battle before the first shot was fired because we lacked adequate fuel, ammunition, and air support to sustain operations against an enemy who possessed all three in abundance. He elaborates with specific examples: Panthers with superior guns but no fuel to maneuver into advantageous positions, Panzer Grenadiers without ammunition to suppress American defenses, tanks destroyed by aircraft that German anti-aircraft guns lacked ammunition to engage effectively. Tactics matter, Balk continues, but logistics determine what tactics are possible. We fought brilliantly within our constraints, and lost anyway because the constraints were impossible. The discussion of American tactical performance draws grudging respect from Balk, who has spent his career fighting enemies he considered inferior to German forces. The Americans at Arracourt fought intelligently, he acknowledges. They occupied excellent defensive terrain and exploited it fully. They adapted to our tactics faster than we could develop new approaches. Their junior officers showed initiative and creativity I did not expect. Their combined arms coordination exceeded anything I encountered on the Eastern Front. He notes particularly the American use of roving reserves to counter German penetrations, a tactic that prevented German forces from consolidating gains, even when initial attacks succeeded. But Balk reserves his highest praise for American logistics and industrial capacity. The critical difference was not in individual combat, but in sustainability. When we destroyed an American tank, 3 more arrived as replacements within days. When Americans destroyed our tanks, we received no replacements. When we exhausted ammunition, supply difficulties meant delays of days before resupply. Americans seemed to have unlimited ammunition. This is not a criticism of American courage or skill. This is recognition that wars are won by factories and supply chains as much as by soldiers. His analysis reflects hard-earned understanding that military operations exist within economic and industrial contexts that ultimately determine outcomes. The question of whether Balk could have won with adequate resources produces thoughtful silence before he responds: define winning. Could I have taken Arracourt with adequate fuel, air parity, and proper logistics? Perhaps. Probably. The Americans held strong positions but not impregnable ones. With proper resources, I could have maneuvered around their strong points, used my mobility advantage, prevented them from concentrating their numerical superiority. He pauses, then adds a crucial qualification: but holding Arracourt would have achieved nothing strategically. Behind 4th Armored Division stood dozens more American divisions, unlimited supplies, complete air superiority. We might have won the battle and still lost the campaign within weeks. His assessment of specific engagements reveals professional analysis stripped of nationalistic bias. The September 19th disaster, when 113th Panzer Brigade lost 43 tanks in the first attack, Balk attributes to inexcusable command failure and inadequate reconnaissance. The September 27th final offensive he describes as Hitler demanding the impossible and me attempting it anyway out of misguided loyalty. He identifies the turning point as September 25th, when clearing weather permitted American air forces to attack German positions systematically. After that date, we could not maneuver in daylight, could not concentrate for attacks, could barely survive. Air power made our tank superiority irrelevant. Balk's comparison of American and German command cultures reveals insights that will influence post-war military doctrine. Germans are trained to obey orders precisely and execute plans thoroughly. This produces excellent results when plans are sound and circumstances match assumptions. But when situations change rapidly, our system responds slowly because junior officers await direction from above. Americans encourage junior officers to improvise solutions to unexpected problems. This sometimes produces chaos, but also enables rapid adaptation. At Arracourt, American adaptability defeated German precision. When interrogators ask about the Sherman tank's reputation, Balk's response demolishes myths that have grown around German armoured superiority. The Sherman was adequate for its role, not exceptional, not terrible, Simply adequate. Yes, our Panthers had better guns and armor, but Panthers broke down constantly, consumed fuel at rates we could not sustain, and required maintenance facilities we rarely possessed. Shermans ran reliably, could be repaired quickly, and were numerous enough that losing them did not cripple American operations. In war, adequate equipment in abundance defeats excellent equipment in insufficient quantities. His post-war writings, produced over decades of retirement, return repeatedly to Arracourt as exemplifying Germany's strategic collapse. In memoirs published in the 1960s, Balck describes the battle as my most frustrating defeat, a battle I knew we should not fight, fought as well as circumstances permitted, and lost because circumstances made victory impossible. He ranks Arracourt as demonstrating that by September 1944, Germany's strategic situation was hopeless, regardless of tactical performance. We could win local engagements through superior tactics and technology, but we could not win campaigns because we lacked the resources to sustain operations against an enemy with unlimited supplies. The question of personal responsibility troubles Balck more than he admits in official interrogations. In private correspondence with fellow officers after the war, he expresses regret for continuing attacks he knew would fail, for sacrificing soldiers to obey orders he recognized as militarily senseless, for prioritizing loyalty to Hitler over responsibility to his men. I should have refused the September 27th attack, he writes to a friend in 1953. I knew it would fail. I attacked anyway and got hundreds of men killed for nothing. That is on my conscience. The admission suggests depth of reflection about command responsibility that official accounts rarely capture. Balck's final assessment of the battle, written in 1978, 4 years before his death, places Arracourt in the broader context of World War II's Western Front. The Battle of Arracourt demonstrated conclusively that Germany had lost the war by autumn 1944. We could still fight skillfully, could still win local engagements, but lacked the strategic resources to alter the war's trajectory. American material superiority, properly employed with adequate tactics, could not be defeated regardless of German skill or technology. The lesson was clear to anyone willing to see it. Continuation of the war after Arracourt served no military purpose and only increased German suffering. The passage reflects the perspective of a man who spent 3 decades analyzing a battle that lasted 11 days, seeking lessons that extend far beyond tactical details into questions of strategy, logistics, and the relationship between military operations and industrial capacity that ultimately determines wars. November 1970. Christopher Gable, a military historian working on a doctoral dissertation at Ohio State University, discovers a filing cabinet in the basement of the Military History Institute containing after-action reports from the 4th Armored Division's operations in Lorraine. He is researching American armored doctrine development, and the reports catch his attention because they describe 11 consecutive days of tank combat during September 1944. Gable knows extensive literature exists about tank warfare in Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, and operations in Germany, but he has encountered almost nothing about autumn 1944 operations in Lorraine. Curious, he begins reading. 6 hours later, having absorbed detailed accounts of what participants called the greatest tank battle on the Western Front, Gable sits back in bewilderment and asks a question that will define his career. Why has no one written about this? The Battle of Arracourt disappeared from historical consciousness despite its scale and significance for reasons that reveal how military history is constructed and remembered. First, timing worked against it. Arracourt occurred in late September 1944, after the dramatic breakout from Normandy captured public imagination, but before the Battle of the Bulge provided the climactic winter crisis. The battle fell into a gap in narrative structure, neither part of the summer triumph nor the winter challenge. Second, Arracourt lacked a simple story. Unlike Normandy with its D-Day drama or the Bulge with its desperate defense, Arracourt was a methodical battle of attrition where Americans held strong defensive positions and destroyed German attacks through superior resources rather than dramatic heroism. The narrative failed to fit templates that post-war historians and popular writers preferred. Third, and perhaps most significantly, Arracourt contradicted emerging myths about Sherman tank inadequacy that took root in American popular consciousness during the 1950s and 60s. Books and articles emphasizing German technological superiority and depicting the Sherman as a death trap sold well to audiences seeking simple explanations for why the war cost so many American lives. Arracourt, where Sherman-equipped units destroyed German armor at 4-to-1 ratios, complicated this narrative. Historians who wanted to argue that American tanks were inadequate had to ignore or minimize the largest tank battle on the Western Front. Many simply ignored it, and Arracourt faded from historical memory except among veterans and specialist military historians. The veterans themselves, scattered across America after the war, maintained connections through 4th Armored Division reunions and veterans organizations. At a reunion in Denver in 1978, survivors of Arracourt gather to share memories and frustration that their battle has been forgotten. Staff Sergeant Thomas Riley, now retired from a career as a machinist in Ohio, tells a researcher attending the reunion, "We knew Arracourt was important while we were fighting it. We destroyed more tanks there than in any other battle we fought, but nobody outside the division seems to have heard of it. Sometimes I wonder if it actually happened or if we just imagined it." The comment reflects a deeper truth about military history. Battles are remembered through narratives that serve contemporary purposes rather than through objective significance. The academic rediscovery of Arracourt begins with Gable's dissertation research and culminates in his 1986 book, Seek, Strike, and Destroy U.S. Army Tank Destroyer Doctrine in World War II, which includes substantial analysis of Arracourt as demonstrating combined arms principles. The book circulates primarily in military professional education circles, studied at West Point, the Army War College, and the Armor School at Fort Knox. Subsequent historians build on Gable's work, producing articles and chapters that gradually restore Arracourt to its proper place in understanding the Western Front. By the 1990s, serious military historians recognize Arracourt as the largest tank battle fought by American forces in Europe and a critical case study in armored warfare. Military professional education embraces Arracourt enthusiastically once historians resurrect it from obscurity. The battle demonstrates principles that remain relevant decades after World War II. The importance of terrain selection, the value of combined arms coordination, the necessity of integrating air and ground operations, the role of logistics in determining tactical possibilities. Staff officers studying operational planning analyze Bulk's approach and identify his errors. Tank commanders study engagement reports to understand gunnery techniques and tactical positioning. Air Force officers examine the battle to understand close air support integration. The battle becomes curriculum rather than history, lessons that inform current practice rather than merely interesting events from the past. The comparison to famous World War II battles reveals Arracourt's significance through quantitative analysis that strips away narrative bias. At Kursk's Battle of Prokhorovka, often cited as history's largest tank battle, approximately 300 tanks were destroyed over several days. At Arracourt, 281 German armored vehicles were destroyed over 11 days, plus 55 American tanks destroyed. The sustained intensity of Arracourt daily combat for 11 consecutive days actually exceeds Prokhorovka's intensity despite the Eastern Front battle's greater fame. During the entire Battle of the Bulge, approximately 800 Allied and German tanks were destroyed over 6 weeks across a front hundreds of kilometers wide. Arracourt's destruction density, hundreds of tanks in 15 square kilometers, exceeds any Western Front engagement in concentrated firepower and tactical intensity. The modern memorial at Arracourt, dedicated in 1994 on the battle's 50th anniversary, reflects the gap between local memory and broader historical consciousness. The French community, which lived through 11 days of combat and years of reconstruction, has maintained careful records and memory of the battle. The memorial includes plaques listing casualties, maps showing battle progression, and photographs of the destroyed villages. It receives perhaps a few hundred visitors annually, mostly local residents and occasional military history enthusiasts, a tiny fraction of the millions who visit Normandy beaches or other famous battle sites. The memorial's modest scale reflects Arracourt's historical obscurity despite its military significance. Veterans' perspectives on why their battle was forgotten reveal frustration mixed with acceptance. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, who commanded at Arracourt and later rose to become Army Chief of Staff, rarely spoke publicly about the battle despite his willingness to discuss other World War II operations. When asked why, in a 1972 interview, Abrams responds, "Arracourt doesn't fit simple stories. We didn't liberate a country there. We didn't stop a dramatic enemy offensive. We just killed a lot of their tanks and lost a lot of ours and held our ground. It was important militarily, but it wasn't dramatic. History remembers drama more than it remembers competent professional work. The comment suggests understanding that historical memory serves cultural purposes beyond merely recording what happened. The battle's influence on American military doctrine far exceeds its historical fame. The Arracourt case study shaped Army development of airland battle doctrine in the 1980s, which emphasized combined arms integration and deep attack against enemy forces. Gulf War planning drew directly on Arracourt lessons about achieving local superiority through concentration and using air power to interdict enemy reserves. Modern military planners studying Arracourt recognize its demonstration that properly integrated air-ground operations can defeat numerically superior or technologically advanced enemies. The battle's doctrinal legacy persists even as its historical memory fades, an interesting inversion where practical lessons survive longer than historical narrative. Comparison to other forgotten battles suggests patterns in how military history is constructed and remembered. Battles that fit clear narratives last stands, breakthrough victories, dramatic reversals enter popular consciousness easily. Battles that demonstrate professional competence without dramatic turning points fade from memory despite military significance. Arracourt exemplifies professional competence. American forces selected good defensive terrain, fought effectively within their doctrine, adapted to enemy tactics, and won through systematic application of combined arms principles. This is precisely how modern militaries want to fight, but it makes poor storytelling compared to desperate defenses or bold offensives. The battlefield today, visited in 2020, shows little evidence of the combat that raged there 76 years earlier. The villages have been rebuilt, fields have been restored to cultivation, forests have regrown. A few markers indicate significant locations. A small memorial where American tanks held their positions, a plaque noting where German armor staged attacks, interpretive signs explaining the battle's progression. A farmer ploughing fields southeast of Arracourt occasionally uncovers shell fragments or equipment pieces, reminders that persist long after visible damage has healed. The landscape has returned to the pastoral character it possessed before September 1944, as though the 11 days of combat were an aberration in the land's longer history. The question of why Arracourt matters, addressed to a modern military audience, produces responses that emphasize tactical lessons over historical narrative. The battle demonstrates that technological advantages can be overcome through superior tactics, logistics, and combined arms integration. It proves that defensive terrain selection matters enormously in mechanized warfare. It shows how air power, properly integrated with ground operations, becomes decisive even against opponents with superior ground equipment. It illustrates that adaptable organizations learn and adjust faster than rigid hierarchies, regardless of individual skill levels. These lessons remain relevant in contemporary military operations, ensuring that Arracourt continues to be studied professionally even as it remains largely forgotten publicly. The final assessment, 76 years after the battle, acknowledges paradox at Arracourt's heart. It was simultaneously one of the most significant tank battles in Western military history and one of the most obscure. The battle proved principles of combined arms warfare that shaped doctrine for decades. It demonstrated American tactical competence and German operational exhaustion at a crucial moment in the war. It validated strategies and technologies that influenced Cold War military development, yet it remains largely